everybody to our Planning Commission meeting tonight. I want to excuse Commissioner Trainer, who couldn't be with us. And I've asked Commissioner Ernest if he would lead us in the pledge.
Follow along with me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. First item on our agenda tonight is the minutes of last month's meeting, November 4th. If everybody had a chance to review those, I'd entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion that we accept the minutes from last month.
Okay, I've got a motion.
Second that.
And a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, next agenda item, we've got a zone change, which is also a public hearing, and a preliminary plat for Vistavue.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. This project was on an agenda earlier this year in a little different form, but largely what I think you're seeing tonight is consistent with what was presented at that point in time. The general plan was amended, like I said, earlier this year, so as to, I think, be consistent really with what's being proposed tonight. And Mike, maybe I'll ask you to kind of help us get through. So the subject property is identified there. With the orange, it's kind of right in the middle. And I'm going to steal. You have a mask or taking out the thing, I feel like. Thanks. So I know this won't show up for anybody that's watching at home. Is that better, Pete? Maybe? I'm just going to go ahead. So the subject property includes this area right here that's identified with that orange color. A couple of points of reference. There's a roadway, maybe kind of hard to see with the colors that we have right here. That's Spanish Fork Parkway. We used to call it 2550 East. This is the intersection of Spanish Fork Parkway and US Highway 6. So anybody familiar with the area knows that there's a neighborhood Walmart right here. There are a couple of buildings under construction over here that'll be different types of retail uses. And the subject property abuts that project on its western side. Like I was saying earlier, the project includes this area that's identified with orange. And also the subject property includes some area to the north as well that's not part of the specific development proposal that you're seeing tonight, but is part of the proposed zone change. So Mike, can you go to the next one for me? This is the current zoning of the subject property. So the orange would accommodate one of our higher density residential designations that we have on the general plan. It is intended from that general plan designation then that we'd see one of maybe a few different zoning districts on the subject property. The applicant has proposed the R4 zone, which would allow for up to 20 units to the acre on probably the southern, I would say, 4/5 of the subject property. And that would require the proposed change from this combination of residential 3 that exists down here, and that remaining part of the property that's currently designated urban village commercial to the north. I think if we go to the next slide, Mike, the proposed zone changes. Let's go to the next one. So this indeed is the proposed zone change. The brown is indicative of the residential 4 zone. And that, as I mentioned earlier, that's what's included in the proposed preliminary plat tonight. The part of the property that would be zoned commercially is identified with the red hue. That's also consistent with the proposed general plan, but currently the applicant doesn't have a specific development proposal for that property. Nonetheless, when we have an opportunity, I think as the city, to change zoning for anticipated non-residential uses, I think we should jump at that. So I think this is a great time to change the zoning on that, to make sure that that property gets preserved for non-residential development in the future. Let's go to the next one again there, Mike. If I remember right, Mike. Yeah. So instead of having north be on the top of the page as it was just a minute ago, north is now over here on the left-hand side of the page. So this is US Highway 6 here. This is the neighborhood Walmart here. I think this illustrates very well some of the improvements that will happen with the proposed project. We'll have what I believe is a very valuable connection for the community, going from Canyon Road over here, tying into the road that's on the south side of the neighborhood Walmart, making that connection, and then eventually as well making a connection over to an existing road that's just south of US Highway 6 there. This will do a lot as this project builds out to improve street connectivity in the area, and hopefully to improve the level of service at some area intersections as motorists, you know, as the citizens of the community simply have other options, you know, as routes to take to get from A to B, rather than what we're limited to today. That image that we just had up, you know, this like maybe the best overall way to kind of get a feel for what's proposed, and we'll see some renderings in a minute. But from the plan view perspective, you can see that each of the different buildings, they have frontage on public streets, which is one of our criteria for the residential 4 zone. We're talking about some fairly sizable structures, and the R4 zone is fairly explicit relative to different architectural tools that need to be employed to make sure that even though buildings might be big, they're not visually boring, and they don't necessarily have big blank walls and different things like that that make for an unattractive neighborhood. But again, we'll touch maybe more on that in a minute. You might recall that as the proposed general plan amendment was reviewed, there was some discussion as to the number of stories that these buildings would have. And I appreciate that as we went, I think actually from the Planning Commission meeting to the City Council meeting, as that was being discussed, the applicant agreed to limit the heights of the buildings to 3 stories. And Mike, let's just kind of go through a couple of other things. We can come back to any of these if the commission wants. Everything is now 3 stories. Yeah. You might be thinking that before we were talking about a couple of them there that would be taller. Yeah. A little different image. This is the landscape plan. It does show just a conceptual view as to how the non-residential part of the project could be developed. Again, that's not part of what's actually being proposed tonight, but I think, you know, obviously with a little bit more detail in the color, that kind of helps things come to life, and to make it a little bit easier to understand exactly what the applicant's proposing to do. And Mr. Morgan, I think I'll let you maybe talk to more of the details on the amenities and that type of a thing, and maybe even to start to wrap up for me. The R4 zone, it's a relatively new zone. This would be the second project that would have been approved in the city if it gets approved with that particular zoning district. This is a little bit different from the other one in that this is proposed to be a condominium development where each of the different homes could be conveyed to separate owners. The other project that we saw was an apartment development. But you know, maybe just speaking generally, and I think I mentioned some things like this during our Development Review Committee meeting. Frankly, I think the community is fortunate, and I understand how neighborhoods feel about density and how this might in some ways be a concern for some of the neighbors, but it's really situations where you have an immediate relationship with something like a grocery store, you know, some type of a non-residential use. In this case, I think it's great that it's something that provides the kind of service for a neighborhood that a grocery store does. A proximity to what are planned to be really, really significant transportation corridors. All of the different streets that this abuts are just that. They're anticipated to be really substantial thoroughfares in the community. In a lot of ways, this is a great location for this particular land use. That's certainly how I see it, and I think it's rare that things are set up as well as this site is for what's being proposed tonight. One key aspect of that, actually, in my view, is the street connection from this public street. The public nature of the road would end right here, but having a vehicular connection into the neighborhood, into the development that's right next door, the commercial development. This really, I think, is a good example of different land uses that can cohabitate really, really well in close proximity to one another. And I think I'm just going to leave it at that maybe for now. Brad Morgan is the developer. And Brad, we have a number of other slides that have different images of the amenities and things like that we can reference. And for Mr. Clark, I forwarded you an email that Brad sent earlier today with some different images as well. I will just mention this, that the Development Review Committee has reviewed both the proposed zone change and preliminary plat and has recommended that those be approved. And I'd certainly be happy to answer any questions that they have of me, maybe before we turn the time over to the applicant.
You know, Dave, just offhand, how close this development would be fitting in the R3? We're proposing an R4, I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's a good question.
What scale is this on?
So, and maybe I'll ask Brandon or the applicant to help me with this. The 16-acre site, is that inclusive of the commercial?
Yes.
That is. Okay, so we'd have to take that out. Do you know how much area there is in the residential part of the project? Or what the density is?
14.6.
So they're at 14.6. The ceiling on the R3 is 12.
Okay.
So
we're
they're
close
two
to
and a
R-
half.
Close to R3.
Yeah,
So with the 4-story, it's closer to R4.
gotcha.
Okay, good to know.
Are these city roads? They will be city roads, Dave?
Yeah, yes, everything that you're pointing out there would be a public street, everything but the direct access to the parking lots that we see in there, those essentially are just driveways in our view.
Can you tell us more about under the conditions number 4, that the applicant works with the adjoining property owner to coordinate east accesses?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have a site plan that's approved for all of the phases of the development that's going on just north of the neighborhood Walmart, just to the east of this project. And one of the requirements actually that we have of that developer is that he provides an easement so that this project can tie into that project, and so that this type of connection, that connectivity can exist between those two projects.
So so the adjoining property owner is commercial.
Yes.
Okay.
So our request and our suggested condition for this developer simply is to correspond with his neighbor and to make sure that they're on the same page relative to exactly where that access would be located. Frankly, his neighbor has much more flexibility in terms of how to accommodate where this connection happens than Mr. Morgan will. When this is approved, this becomes fairly set in stone. But for his neighbor, it's just a matter, at this point as I see it, of potentially modifying some line work on their plan to potentially change how their parking lot would work. This was intended to be the precise point of connection, and I'm not sure that's where it is on Mr. Morgan's plan, but it would be very easy for these folks to modify their layout to accommodate that different point of connection. So
The leg that connects to Canyon Road, is that also tied up by the applicant? The
This-
portion, the little
yeah.
leg, because it's not necessarily right over here.
Spanish Fork City owns the property that's,
Okay. But they're going to have to do it as part of their development? Just want to make sure they can.
Yep.
And that answers that question.
Perfect.
Can you can you show us where it adjoins on Canyon Road so we can see which roads across from it would line up? Or is there a road, like, is it close to like 2300 or?
It's right there.
There's that.
That is 23, yeah.
And then where would it adjoin? Oh, right there. So
Right
it's
across the street.
just right across. Okay.
Is there talk of an intersect or a light at all at that intersection at this point, or do you guys wait until you see what the traffic looks like?
We do roundabouts in this.
We took it to UDOT and it doesn't warrant one today. So we're having another study done. If this were to go in, how would it impact it? Would it warrant one then? Because obviously with 12 units to the acre, it's going to warrant one very soon. We'd rather it go in sooner than later, but UDOT's a little harder to convince. So we're hoping the second study will entice them to put it in sooner than later.
But you foresee eventually
Yes, there'll be a signal.
there will
there.
be a light there?
Yeah.
Okay.
2300 East, incidentally, I know this has freaked some people out as we talked about the river bottoms, but it really is planned on being a really significant kind of belt route, you know, through the southern part of Spanish Fork, even tying in into Salem. So this connection that would be made through here up to that intersection on US 6, that's a really big deal in terms of Spanish Fork City's long-term transportation network for this, really, I would say, about half of the city.
Is there already a wall on the other side? There's a masonry wall on the neighborhood Walmart side between there and the houses in the neighborhood. If you are going, is it west? Is it on the west side of that neighborhood? Is there already a masonry wall there?
No.
And is there provision to put one there?
On the west side of the neighborhood, so you're talking about the road, next
Yeah.
to the road?
The road, right next to the road, like behind the Russells.
Gotcha. Yes, is the answer.
There'll be one on both sides. So our typical cross-section will hold. You'll have one on the east side and one on the west side here.
And this developer's responsible for that wall? Okay. Any other questions for staff before we invite the applicant to come up? All right, thanks, Dave.
You bet.
They don't show it on this one, it shows it on the other one.
Here.
You're a brave soul.
You want me to start out with questions that you may have? We kind of went through this a lot with on the general plan amendment. So not a ton has changed except for the look of our structures, taking them from a 4th story to a 3-story and from a pitched roof to a flat roof. So we have the images I sent out today to Dave. I think they got emailed over. So if we can pan to those. Because it'll show kind of, we had to model it with the landscaping and everything so you can see rooftops and stuff like that. It'll
So
give a,
density hasn't changed from what you showed us before?
it's dropped.
Other than the 4 stories have come
Yeah, so we
down?
went from, I think, 190 something or 216 down to 176.
Because of those 2
Right,
buildings dropping?
Yep. So this is a layout, that's what the units are going to look like, and there is some renderings that'll show you strictly what the units look like, but that's the corridor coming into the roundabout, kind of showing the building, and there's, I think, 4 or 5 of these that we've got here that you could take a look at if you want to scroll through them, but give an overall feel for it. Like I mentioned before, some unique things we're doing is a resale product. We are offering 2-bedroom units, smaller 3-bedroom units, and larger 3-bedroom units, meaning like 1,500 square foot, so above and beyond. So it'll be a good demographic mix for different folks that want different styles of homes. They're all garage parked, so all main level will have direct garage access, and then the upper units will have garage that they have to go out to. But so that's just the mock-up of the roundabout there.
Is each unit on a single floor, or do some units expand floors?
Yeah, so they're all stacked flat.
Okay.
Yep. So there's no town 2-story style there. So there's a few shots of what it was. Originally, it was a little bit more pitched roof and stuff there. We went back and kind of modeled it, done some market research, and wanted to bring something a little more current, a little more fitting to with what the fire station is, with what the ridge looks like, just something that ties in a little bit more there. So we went back to the drawing board, and this is what we came back with. I think it looks good. I think it fits everything. All the units will have patios or balconies. The bigger units will actually have 2 balconies for some outdoor space. We've provided some more information to the city on what our pavilion's going to look like, the style it's going to be. Just it's all just a little bit more modern than the traditional post and roof line type thing there. And largely, I don't know if you've seen the photos outside of these, what it was, but it's pretty much the same.
Any questions?
Brad, you said they're all garage parked. On the plans, it calls out 144 garages, and you have 176 units?
Yeah, so code is 80%, and so
60%.
60%, yeah, and I think that we're at 80%.
So they're not all parked. You have plenty of parking spaces. I mean, you're at 450.
Yep, so yeah, I think it's around 80%-ish. We'll have garages. I could do the exact math really quick, but yes, and then we are overparked on total parking stalls as well, so. And we
Does that parking, sorry to interrupt, does that parking count the parking stalls in the commercial area, or is it just this project?
Strictly the residential and no street parking.
Okay.
Yep, it's all stalls and garages.
Oh,
Yep.
Good. Do you have a draft? Have you written up a draft of your CC&Rs?
So we've done other multifamily projects, so we'll largely use those, the same ones. They've worked really well for us. We've done a project in Springville. They went through them, liked them. We did one in Heber, totally different cities, totally different feel. They liked them, so it'll be very similar. So we haven't finalized these, but yes, we have a rough draft essentially.
There's a provision that of the percentage that can rent.
Yeah, so even more over than that, it's a financing thing. So if you go over 50%, then for financing, they become essentially non-warrantable, especially on FHA. And so, yeah, our provision, I think we keep it around 40 to 45%, strictly for you can't, if we were at 50% and we had 3 people in the neighborhood that got deployed and they needed to rent their units, by the way, you can't discriminate against that, you can't stop that. So we keep our numbers slightly less in that 45 range to allow for a circumstance. But 50% is really the maximum.
I really like in your renderings about that you've got trees and a lot of greenery that make a neighborhood look really nice.
Well, thank you. Yeah. City has good standards. They fall within their standards, so I think it looks great.
Do you know if parking is permitted along the interior public road?
So we talked about this before, that if the city, I don't like on-street parking at all, so if the city, we have enough parking, so essentially if the city wanted to red stripe that, if they not allow for parking, it's more of a city ordinance there. But width-wise, so the road that goes north-south, that road's a 127-foot wide road. It's pretty substantial. And then the one going into Walmart is probably just a standard cross-section. But in our calculations, what we're planning on is no parking there.
We would allow for parking there unless it became a problem.
Okay.
Which is usually for snowplows.
Right.
One thing that has been a problem with some of the close by condominium type communities is the parking for people who have larger vehicles, and now they're parked on Canyon Road. Is
Yeah.
there a provision that you have for some larger vehicle parking?
So typically, no, I guess is the answer to that question, but typically larger vehicles, pickup trucks, crew cab trucks, whatever, they're able to back up and park where they've got some bumper overhang in the open space and stuff is pretty typical, but we don't have any extended stalls or anything like that. And but our garages, I don't know if you can scroll to the floor plan there on but our garages vary in depth as well. You don't have floor plans?
I think there's a staff report coming out of the
Oh, okay. But yeah, I think some of them are up to 26 feet deep, but most are 22 to 20 feet deep. So it depends on the vehicle they have and stuff in there. But largely, they would be perimeter parked.
Are you going to do this in phases?
Yes, so we have a phasing map maybe in here, but essentially it's one phase per building, except for phase 4 has an 11-plex and a 22-plex in it. And recently, in the last week or so, originally our main community amenities were in our 4th phase. And in negotiating and chatting back and forth with staff, we've moved that up to our 3rd phase. That we feel like there'll be enough units in there to make it financially feasible to maintain the space, to where, it's probably going to be $1 million worth of amenities or something in that range, so it gives enough there. But yeah, it'll be in 8 phases, to answer your question. And then that's the floor plan. So you can see some of the garages in the center section are definitely deeper than the ones on the sides. So those units will probably go to the top floor units as premiums. And the reason we're not super settled on the commercial yet is we've had one group that wants to do, something gymnastics and tumbling, and then we've had a medical clinic approach us as well, so it's kind of really both sides. And so I've just asked them if they could maybe table it for a little bit until we kind of get through this stage and kind of see where we're at, and then we can come back and see where they're at. That's why we haven't moved forward with that plating yet, is we're a little uncertain on the type of product we're going to have in there.
And so that will depend on how many units are available for commercial, is what the demand is for the space.
Yeah, I can't remember. Scott and I went through it, but I think it was somewhere in the 40,000 square foot of commercial. Does that sound right? Ish. Yeah, so the footage is there. Obviously, if it goes medical, I think it requires more parking stalls, so we do less square footage. That way, so it depends on the type of product we have. Will be, if we do all medical, we might get 32,000 square feet instead of 40,000 feet, because you got to have more stalls.
And all of the public road is in phase 1?
Yeah.
Okay.
Including the connection to Canyon Road?
Yep,
Yeah.
and the connection to Walmart, and the connection to 750, and the roundabout. It's all
All
in
of the
phase one.
roads will be done.
Very good.
Mike, I think if you go back a few slides, there's the phasing plan.
Can you go to the phasing plan? Sorry.
The staff report shows a phasing plan. I'm not sure
Right
what
there.
other changes there are. Phase 3 and 4 seem to have changed, right,
Yep.
Brad?
So you can see the roads, and it kind of curves up around the building, but yeah, that's all phase 1 action right there.
You have to do anything with the property owners to the west of you as far as the roads go? Or are you doing like half the road at this point, and then the other half, or part of the other road will be as the property to the west develops?
Yeah, so as that's drawn, that's what we're doing. So
Okay,
you can
so that
see it.
line to the south is what you're doing?
We're doing the roundabout, the whole road down below there, because the city owns that space, so we're doing all of that improvement,
Okay.
all the way out to Canyon Road. So the improvements we're doing right now, it shows the dark line kind of at the bottom, but we're actually improving the road that's below that dark
Got
line
it.
as well.
That makes sense. Okay.
Okay.
Yep, that'll all be tied in. There's some irrigation ditches that need to be relocated and stuff like that that we've met with, and will be being taken care of, moving it into a higher quality HDPE welded pipe, so.
So not the side of the road that's on the north part of that? You
No,
won't-
it's
okay.
just half, it's the,
Gotcha.
that road is
Yeah.
it's wide, 127, so even it's the half, is still a full road. I mean, it's
Right.
big, yeah.
So Mike, any concerns from an engineering point with this, people coming this way and trying to turn into here?
The cross-traffic will just be pretty small at this point.
Okay.
You'll have a decent amount coming this direction, maybe. But as far as traveling north, the only people that would be there would be these folks here. And I just don't see a peak where a stop sign here, them trying to get out would be an issue at all.
Okay.
How
We're-
will,
oh,
how
go
will
ahead, sorry.
how will this impact the neighbors that are to the west?
So to the west and to the north, there's a property there. Yep, and so there's some ditches on their property right now that we will be coming in, and again, it's a 42-inch HDPE piping. Right now, even the stuff up by Walmart, according to them, is leaking. So it's not even on our plan, but we're going and picking up 375 feet of that piping at $300 a foot and replacing it and bringing it down and tying it in. So it'll flow out to Canyon. There's a little bubble up there and then into the ditch on their property. So it will drop down and tie in, but be replaced with something much more high quality.
So, neighbors.
Yeah, I mean, the ditch just, it wouldn't get, hydrology, if it was leaking, it just wouldn't work. So in meeting with the ditch company, I think it was around 375 or something like that we're going to go and pull out and replace there. And then we'll have, on our property along the Walmart boundary as well, we'll have a tilt-up concrete fence along there also.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, with that, I think at this point, let's go ahead and move into public hearing. If there's anybody in the room that would like to speak about this particular development, just approach the mic, state your name, and then you'll have about 3-4 minutes to address us. We'll answer any questions after we close public hearing. So we'll move into public hearing at this time.
I think we can come to you, Pete, right?
There you go.
We have a microphone.
Even better.
Here, we can pay right here.
I object to the half a road on the west.
Can you state your name first?
I'm sorry.
You're fine. There we go.
There.
All right.
Name again.
We're going to have you start over in just a second.
That's okay.
All right. Your name one more time, please.
Luella Farnworth.
Luella, okay. And can you explain again the half a road? What are your concerns there?
Because that other property is mine,
Okay.
and I don't want to sell it.
Okay.
I'm on a green belt right now, and they want property on the west side also for that other subdivision. So if you take it from both sides, I wouldn't have my green belt.
Would it be less than 5.25 acres?
Pardon?
Would it be less than 5.25 acres if they took it from both sides?
I have just under 7. You have to have the 5 for the green belt.
5.25.
And also, I've questioned the apartments because I understand there's no elevators. And I don't know anybody that wants to carry groceries 3 floors. Sorry. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Luella.
My name is John Russell. I live at 2307 East, 1035 South. One of the questions that I'd like answered, there seemed to be I heard it tonight, but I've heard it different ways, and that is who's taking care of the wall that is on the south side of the Walmart right now, the masonry wall that wraps around and goes onto 2300 East. I heard tonight it sounded somebody here sounded like they said you're going to take care of that, the developer, and somebody said yes. I've heard it the other way, that the city was going to take care of it. If you'll just address that question for us, make sure that that's answered. Who's going to take care of that? And then as far as the height, right now I think it's an 8-foot wall on the south side. Will that continue on, and will it also continue on the south side and the west or east side, well, on 2300? And then also the other thing that has come up with the roundabout on the east side of Walmart, there's kind of an incline as the cars come up. It's kind of an incline as they come up, their headlights round and then they shine into the back in the windows of some of the owners of the houses. I was just wondering, is there some grading that's going to happen on that roundabout that we see here that will cause those lights as they round that to maybe come around and shine. I see that there's kind of a curve to that. Will you kind of address that as well? Other than that, the development, I think it's a great addition to our community, but I want to make sure that those concerns are addressed. Thank you.
Question for you. Question for you. Are you talking about, let me use my pointer here, potential lights shining into these buildings here? Is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about the development
The other one.
that is on the opposite side.
Shining in here?
Are you talking about, no, as they round, they come, it's actually further back.
Talking right here.
Yeah, let's see, where am I looking here? So it's further back as they come up the hill. There are lights that actually shine in those, in that area.
In there?
They come around.
Like
Around-
into the second floor? Like,
Well,
or is that? Or
I've just heard from
Really?
neighbors that that's what happens. They can see those headlights into their windows.
At the roundabout or when they come out of the
Could be here
Walmart
too,
parking
Mike.
lot?
As they're coming up that hill there, and then it's coming around. So the headlights are coming this way, then you go to the roundabout, they shine away, and then possibly hit it again as they come around again.
Is this 8 feet right here? This wall?
I thought it was 6.
I thought it was 6 as well.
Looks like
Yeah,
5 feet, 10 inches,
I think we agreed
Steve.
on 8 foot there,
Okay.
so I'm pretty sure it's
So
8.
that
but-
entire wall is 8 feet? or
Yeah.
It's the same height all the way down?
I believe so, yeah. And I wanted to just clarify that that would be continued on and not like a jog down as from where it stopped. Will it continue, and then will that same height continue wrapped around the next
Down
2,300?
through the- Okay,
Thank you.
thanks. Anybody else? Anything that's not been addressed that anyone wants to speak about?
So I'm Canyon Farnworth. So I was wondering about the first phase of where they're going to be replacing the water ditch and how long that's going to take, because we water about once a month during the summer. So I want to know if that's going to be cut off from us from watering the field. Yes.
So to answer that question, the type of piping that's going in is difficult to get. And so we're actually in the process of acquiring it now. And we'll need to have that ditch in before water comes on next spring.
Sweet.
Okay, perfect.
Anyone else? All right, let's go ahead and move out of public hearing. Let's see, where do we start?
I would like to know a little more about green belt.
As far as the neighbor's property?
Well, I think I just need education. What does that mean?
I don't know if this helps necessarily at all, and I'd ask Jared or Mike, Brandon to maybe correct me if I'm seeing it differently, but I don't believe there are imminent plans to build anything beyond the half-width road now. We're talking about a road that when it's fully constructed, it's intended to accommodate how many lanes?
5.
5. So half of that road will easily accommodate two-way traffic at a width that's similar to our typical Spanish Fork Street well into the future. So I understand that we don't anticipate impacting the Farnworth property at all with this. And in that regard, you know, the greenbelt question, I don't think is necessarily going to be any problem at all. That property should stay intact 100% until it develops, or it's conceivable that we would get some funding like we've talked about before through, it's the Mountain Land Association of Governments is the regional transportation kind of authority to do a big project. And Mike, maybe if you can talk about what the ultimate plan for the area is. I think that's what he's going to show us here. But until either the Farnworth property develops or this happens, I think that property will be left alone.
So as long as Luella doesn't want to do anything, she wants to keep it exactly as it is today, she'll be able to for as long as she wants.
You know, the only exception would be, and I think this is kind of a long shot and wouldn't happen probably, certainly for the next 5 years. What you said is exactly the case.
Okay.
Well, even if we got funding, it would just be, okay.
I thought that road was supposed to come off of Highway 6 eventually.
That is correct. So maybe, Mr. Clark, if you can kind of just touch on what that would look like eventually.
Yeah, so this development is this area right here. You can't, kind of hard to see, I don't have a pointer, but this is what we're having them build right now, as well as then any frontage that wants to be developed, if that makes sense. So because they want to develop, they widen their half of the road beyond the ribbon road, which is that skinny black line there. And that's where the curb and gutter, the planter strip, the sidewalk trail, all that comes in. And then since they're going first, we say, well, we need the road to be half the width plus a little bit, and that gives them the functionality of the road. When the other side wants to develop, we say widen it the rest of the way, which gives maybe one more lane, maybe a shoulder, and then their side of curb and gutter, planter strip, sidewalk. So really it's, once the ribbon road can do 2 lanes, but once you have a driveway or other things like this development's bringing, then you need to have a turn lane, you need to have a deceleration lane to make the turn. And so that's why you widen it that much. So once the one side goes in, it lasts a long time as far as volume of traffic. There's no need to make a left because it goes into a field, so there's no need for that extra left turn lane or for a shoulder on that side of the road. So for all intents and purposes, if that field never developed, we would, for a long time, never really need to ask for any property there.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I just noticed on this map, because now you've got the road coming off farther west, off Highway 6
Over here?
way down here in the front.
No, yeah.
Right there, yeah.
Oh, over here.
Is that where it's gonna come off then, still?
That was the idea,
That was
Jared.
the old one, and I thought they was gonna do it different.
Well, the original thought was somewhere on this area, see this line between the yellow and the green? But it didn't give a lot of room for development to happen between that really wide arterial road and the existing subdivision. So we laid out a couple ideas of lot widths based on the zoning and general plan and said, here's about the room we need to make something be able to happen on that side. And so that's how it got shifted up. Plus it aligns with this road that is already existing into the East Meadows, I think, subdivision. And it might move maybe a little bit this way and then kind of bend up, but again, this is a concept, not really a.
I know where the old one is planted, or where that, it's where that one off of Highway 6, where that barrier wall is supposed to come off right about there.
Jared, remind me, I think we moved where this roundabout was going.
It's pretty similar to what, it's going to be right with that.
It's there, okay.
So that's phase 2 of the MAG application, which would be 4 to 5 years from now.
Yeah.
What about phase 3?
Phase 3 is the ribbon road.
What's the timeline on that?
That would be 7 years.
Okay.
Could you fill us in on where the irrigation ditch is that services the property of Mrs. Farnworth?
So it comes here. I'm not an expert on it, but I believe it comes right here, doesn't it? Along the back of the property. And then, is this another leg that comes up to this point, right? And that comes along the backyard. Pretty easy to see all the way up into this spot here. And then there's one that travels here, another one there.
Very good.
A lot of ditches.
A lot of ground.
Yep.
Could you tell us about the roundabout and angles of the lights going into homes and?
Will there be grading on this other roundabout?
This one will be flat. Now,
Grading
do you know any more about it, Scott, than I do? But it'll be at grade. We don't have a need to raise it other than, what, a few feet for the ditch?
Right.
So, I don't know, how much, Scott?
2 to 3, maybe, just at the ditch part.
Yeah. know, 2-3 feet over 100 feet. I don't think it'll be
You just want to
near the
protect
15 feet or so the
other one has.
Mike, you want to protect the homes down here.
What's that?
As cars come out this way, you'll want to make sure the lights aren't shining in here. Shining
Yeah.
at the houses.
Well, any T intersection, you're gonna have lights shining into a house. So try and minimize that for arterial roads. It's not very common. Roundabouts is a different animal, but yeah. If you come this way, yeah, you'll have lights into this house. But more than that, well,
think the
no, you
wall-
won't, because this will be flat here.
Yeah.
And you'll have a 6-foot wall because it's an arterial road.
Yeah.
So even if this is a single-family home, you'll have a 6-foot wall and an at-grade intersection. So I don't think you'll have a light into the
And
family room.
I think he was talking more about at that roundabout. My light doesn't work very well. Anyway, at that roundabout where then it backs up to the neighborhood that's existing. So in the bottom right.
This one coming this way?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly,
same
right
thing.
there.
If it's an 8-foot wall, this is going up about this high, over 100 feet. I don't think you're going to get a.
So it's less than at the
The
other.
grading plan shows that being very flat there. It's not
Okay.
gonna, has nowhere near the hill the other side has.
The other one's 15 feet plus. This will be like 3.
And then what's the agreement for the wall extension around that neighborhood?
So if it's along an arterial street, minor arterial collector, it has to be a 6-foot wall on property line. If they've agreed to do an 8-foot, that's great. But anywhere it abuts a arterial road, it needs to be, unless it's commercial or, well, commercial, industrial, multifamily. Those don't have walls for obvious reasons. But anywhere it abuts a single family, it has to have that wall.
Who's paying for and who's installing the wall?
So the developer pays for and installs it, and then the city maintains it.
Okay, so
I
the
heard if.
developer during phase 1, when the roads are being in, would also be putting that wall in?
That's what we were just talking, if it's a requirement of the city that has to go in along there, then it's a cross-section requirement. I wasn't aware of that, it's a cross-section requirement.
Well, not like along here,
Not west.
right? But just where it abuts this
Right.
area right here. And then the single family on this side.
Mike, you mind bringing up the full map out to Canyon Road for me?
And Brad, can you confirm, I've heard a lot of ifs in that. Is it going to be an 8-foot wall that's going to continue that same wall?
I think it's 6.
Can I mention something along those lines? I don't think we've had this conversation with Brad relative to the height of the wall. I don't remember us discussing it on this project. I would just say, and I'm pretty comfortable speaking for the city, that if it's an 8-foot wall further to the east, we want to continue it the same way, all the way over to 2300 East, where it would turn then down to Canyon Road. I could see us maybe on that leg from, is it 9th South? From
920.
920 South, so that's the road that's just south of Walmart that we're talking about. Where that turns, I could see that just being a 6-foot wall. That's the typical that we would do. And if it's indeed flat there, we would do a 6-foot wall, at least typically.
Okay, so you're saying then that the developer will match whatever the existing wall is all the way down to the corner. If it's 8 feet, then it's 8 feet, and then give them leverages to either keep it at 8 feet all the way down or drop it to 6 feet?
I would just say that I think short of there being something that necessitates a taller than 6-foot wall on that north-south leg of the wall, the 2300 East part, that would be 6 feet. I don't know if Mike or Jared, you guys see it differently. Typically, we install a 6-foot wall, or we require a developer to.
The only place we've done 8s is around substations and other things like that.
I'm not sure that this wall is an 8-foot wall. That is right over East Bench's, one of their main canals that goes along there. And the dirt is built up there to cover that pipe, and the wall's on top of that. So it appears to be higher than 6 feet, but I'm kind of thinking that, and I could be very wrong. But I think that's a 6-foot wall.
Whether it's 6 or 8, the agreement will be that it matches whatever's existing, right?
That's great, but I can tell you right now, that is an 8-foot wall because we argued for that one.
Okay. You mind using the mic so the people at home can hear what you're saying?
One of the concerns I have about that transition is that's my backyard. The corner is my backyard. I'd rather have it uniform, and it's going to go run the length of that our entire yard. Jot it down 6 foot. If somebody else wants to argue with go and transition to 6 foot after that, fine. But if you can make that
At least from
if
here
it's
to
not
here?
8 foot, match what it is now. And I'm telling you right now, it is 8 foot.
So you don't want it to be 8 foot on here and 6 foot on here, is what you're saying?
Right. I'd like it the same.
Okay.
My wife would say the same thing too.
Not sure who makes that decision.
Well, I mean, I just had a couple of other thoughts about the wall. And once again, our public works guys, they can jump in here. And Jared, you've got maybe some history that Mike doesn't have.
It's an 8-foot wall.
It is, I believe.
It would make sense to make an 8-foot wall all the way around to just match them with uniform. It'll end short because of the side triangle. It won't come all the way up anyhow. So, and that's going to be landscape area if this project has to go.
Right, right.
It makes
30
sense to
feet
be
back.
8 foot through this property and then maybe 6 feet for the remaining 2.
Okay. And then
Now-
across the street, are you, did I hear right that there's going to be a row or a wall on this side as well? And how far up does that go? Just to here?
No, it'd continue along until it ends.
Until it drops down to the half-width road. That's where the wall would stop.
That's where the wall would stop?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, one other, sorry. I'm
We're
sorry.
proposing to just match the road with the wall and then cleaning up the property. So the properties don't really match with anything else.
Okay. Commissioner Mitchell, I don't know if this starts to zero in on some of the ifs that you're hearing, but I believe typically in situations like this, a developer is not responsible to do a full road and the improvements on the other side of the road. Right, so some things have been said suggesting that Mr. Morgan's going to pay for the wall on the south side, for example, and different things like that. That's not the case, at least not long term. I don't know if we're in a situation where he's maybe doing some improvements on the front end and then gets reimbursed. Those are details I haven't really focused on this project, but typically with something like this, we would look for the developer to do their side of the road, that frontage. And even in some cases where we're talking about roads that are this large, they actually can get reimbursed for some of those improvements, improvements that go beyond just the need that their project creates. And that's what our impact fees at least are in part for. It's to reimburse developers for that. So I just mentioned that by way of being clear about not necessarily the developer footing the bill for all of that. I think what's more important, though, is understanding that before a certificate of occupancy is granted for any of the homes in the project, the improvements will be in like they've been described, and that's how it'll unfold.
Okay.
Are there any proposed maybe wrought iron or gable fences along the commercial where the residential abuts commercial, or no? I just can't tell on the site plan. There are? Okay.
Walmart has a small section in place around some of the equipment that they have back of house, but other than that, the developer would be installing a wall.
And then on the north side of the north side of the residential that will abut their commercial will, same thing?
Right.
Okay.
Address what Mrs. Farnsworth commented on about the elevators and the 3 stories. I lived in quite a few apartment buildings on the 3rd floor that I walked all the way up the stairs when I lived in Provo when I was in school. So that's a fairly normal thing. I think if it was if it was 4 stories, that's a little more of a stretch, but that is a fairly normal way to build those. Not fun, but a good workout for the 3rd floor people.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
This is unsolicited, but if I can just maybe mention this, I really appreciate the issue being raised about the townhomes that are close to the 2550 East, 920 South roundabout. If we indeed have headlights that are shining in there, there's probably not an immediate fix to that, but there are things that could be done, trees, different things like that, you know, to, I think, help improve that. And if any of those neighbors wanted to come in and talk to us about maybe what could be done to try to make that situation better, we'd be happy to talk about that.
All right. If there's no more discussion or questions, any additional discussion from commissioners before we entertain a motion? I just want to say the architecture of it, the elevations look great. I think I like the flat roof look with the Reese Apartments. The flat roof look, I think, turned out really well from what they had with the pitches in their initial plan, and I think what you've got here looks really, really good.
And it looks good, like you've tied it in well with the surrounding buildings, which ties in the area really well. Kind of brands the area.
Yep. And I can't think of a better location for this amount of density, because I mean you can go to the grocery store without even getting in your car. Anybody that lives here basically can access Highway 6 without driving through a single residential neighborhood. So I think as far as the density goes, I think this is a great location for it. Does anybody want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that the proposed zone change and preliminary plat be approved based on the on fulfilling the findings and conditions as outlined.
Okay, we've got a motion by Commissioner Warnick.
Second?
A second. We'll do a roll call vote on this one. Commissioner Ernest?
Yes.
Commissioner Mendenhall?
Yes.
Yes from me. Commissioner Warnick?
Yes.
Commissioner Mitchell?
Yes.
Okay, that passes. When will that go to City Council, Dave? Do we know when will that be on their next meeting?
Yeah, I appreciate that. That'll be next Tuesday night. We don't know yet if they're going to meet here in person or if that's just going to be online. We'll find that out, I think, on Friday. So.
I do have one quick question for the developer. What is the timeline for construction? You talked about having the ditch in place, or the pipeline in place, so that it could be irrigated this spring. So how soon do you plan on it?
As soon as Dave gives us thumbs up, no. Yeah, so literally once we get final plat, we don't do loans or anything, so literally as soon as we've got a couple connexes out there, we'll have the HDPE stocked in about 3 to 4 weeks, and so as soon as we get thumbs up to go, we'll go.
Thanks for your diligence in following through with these things that we've had issues with and stuff, and we're looking forward to a great project.
Yep. All right, next agenda item. We've got the Rindlisbacher annexation.
Once again, Mr. Chairman, thank you. This proposal is relatively simple. The subject property is located out near what we call the Salem-Benjamin interchange. I think this is kind of a special part of the community. It's the last undeveloped interchange, as I understand, along the Wasatch Front. And we're in the process of installing some fairly expensive, very significant infrastructure in the area that would allow for this property and others to be developed. The red line is kind of hard to see on this image, but if you look closely and can see that, that's the current city boundary. And for a variety of reasons, and I think, largely from a timing perspective, it's particularly because of the investment that the city's currently making in the area. This is a great time to approve annexations like this one. So that indeed is staff's recommendation. It's to approve the annexation of this approximately 30 acres. There currently is not a development proposal on the table, so to speak. So with that, we would recommend that rural residential zoning be assigned to the subject property at the time of annexation. That would simply mean that any proposal for development would be accompanied by a zone change. You're to see that in the future. but it's frankly very easy for staff at this time to recommend that this project be annexed, or sorry, property be annexed with rural residential zoning.
What's the zone on the general plan for that area?
That's a good question. I believe a fair part of it is mixed use, and there might be some of the
Little
urban
commercial.
density residential designation and commercial on the
Right
west
by
side
the
as well,
freeway.
right? And again,
Kind
these
of
are
a
lines that aren't intended to
rainbow.
be followed in a real hard and fast way, but just to illustrate that closest to the interchange on that 8,000 south frontage, if we think there are commercial opportunities that should not be missed, and that, as a transition from that, going to other parts of the community, maybe a mixture of uses, high-density residential, office, and that type of thing, maybe other high-density residential kind of development, that just is a reasonable and sound kind of land use pattern to promote in the area. So I think if somebody proposed a development of this property, this is kind of actually what we're looking at on the property that's just east of this one. There would be some land set aside for some future commercial development that may not be viable still for some time to come, but you probably see a project that would be predominantly residential.
Dave, can you give us a status update on the lift station? How
I'd
that
love
would
to, but
affect- how that
Mike
would
and
affect
Jared are
this.
dying, I'm sure, to get some mic time, so. Probably Jared. I think Jared's in charge of that, in fact. Yeah.
The lift station is currently out to bid right now. It should open or be awarded late December. Construction will begin. About 30, 35 feet deep. And then it should finish up by this time next year.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion if you're willing to entertain it.
Any more discussion before we have a motion? Go ahead.
I make a motion that the Planning Commission recommends that we annex in this property, and we do so with the rural residential zoning based on compliance with staff's findings and conditions.
I have a motion from Commissioner Ernest.
Second it.
A second from Commissioner Mitchell. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, that will go to the City Council. Title 15 Amendment, and this is a public hearing.
Mr. Chairman, would you mind, just because we have folks here to speak to item number 6, and I don't think we do for item 5, do you mind if we jump ahead to item 6 and just talk about that now?
Nope, don't mind at all. So item 6 is a concept review of the Lennar homes.
Okay, great, thank you. First of all, just to kind of describe where we're at in the process with this is a fairly recent procedure that we have, just concept review we call it. This is to give a property owner or potential developer an opportunity to get some airtime in a semi-formal kind of a forum with either staff or you as the Planning Commission, maybe even the City Council, just to get thoughts from those different bodies about a particular proposal. I'm going to try to be as candid as I can be. We know that there are a lot of concerns among neighbors about what ultimately is going to happen with this property. And to that end, I appreciate some conversations that we've already had leading up to what we'll talk about tonight. It was really on the heels of the action that the City Council took on the town-owned project just a little bit north of this one, that we started speaking with Mr. Winterton, who's here with us tonight representing the property owners here, about what potentially could happen with this property. And it was actually a conversation that happened in the parking lot out here after a City Council meeting. I think it was largely the city manager that was talking with some neighbors, and I kind of interrupted and through a discussion, kind of arranged just to have a few neighbors come to meet with the developer and staff to see what might make sense to do with this property. And I appreciate them not necessarily being any kind of formal representatives of the neighborhood, but just as concerned neighbors, being a part of some conversations that we've had. And I believe Mr. Winterton will kind of talk through, how those conversations have gone. But to certainly some extent, what we're seeing tonight is a representation of, I think, both the property owners' original plans and their ultimate goal for the property in terms of how they'd like to see it developed, and conversations that have been had with the neighbors, and subsequent changes that have been made to that original plan that Mr. Winterton had in mind for the property. And just one last thing, and I really appreciate Mr. Rasmussen being here with us tonight. I hate to put you on the spot at all, and I hope we're not doing that necessarily, but we thought it might be helpful for you as the commission just to hear from, maybe one voice, in consideration of the neighbors. Like I said, just with the understanding that we know that this is something that's caused a certain amount of anxiety for the neighborhood, and we'd love to have, Mr. Rasmussen maybe to share his thoughts on things as well. So that's kind of the plan for how we'd proceed. I think Cody has a presentation he wants to walk through, but really for tonight, we hope that you as the commission will just be as open and candid as you can be. I don't think you can hurt anybody's feelings, so please don't hold back and let us know what you'd like to see if the project moves forward. Likely the next time you see a proposal here, it would be in a public hearing setting with a zone change application and preliminary plat. And usually at that point, it gets a little bit harder to get a developer to make changes and that sort of a thing. So,
Thanks, Dave.
Good evening, Commissioners. I appreciate the time. Just to introduce myself, my name is Cody Winterton, and I'm actually not the developer. If you know the property owners, if some of you may know him, Grant Tingey is my grandfather, and Ty Tingey is I'm his nephew. That's my uncle. So I'm actually a family member. I've been asked by my grandpa and my uncle to represent the family, and so to be clear, I'm not the developer. I'm actually here on behalf of the landowner. The developer the potential developer that we've chosen, or we'd like to do a future transaction with, is Lennar Homes. And Matthew Anderson, who's the vice president of Lennar, is here with us tonight. And so if you don't mind just going to the next slide, please. I'm sure you're familiar with the property. My family purchased this property in 1963 and has basically for the last 50-something years operated as a commercial feedlot as part of what was formerly the Spanish Fork Livestock Auction right here on these grounds. It's been a really good business for our family. So it's a piece of property that means a lot to us. And the only reason I'm emotional tonight is because my grandpa is not doing very well right now. And so if it were up to him, we'd be feeding cattle on this for the rest of the time. So I apologize for my emotions. I just came from his house, and I'm full with a lot of emotions with him tonight. So I'm sorry, I don't usually do this, but anyways, to get on this, the property is kind of right between two pieces here. If you see on the south side, this whole area, if you'll go to the next slide, as you know, in your general plan, it's the blue area on Del Monte Road. And one of the great things about Spanish Fork all through this process is we've owned this property. My uncle will tell you that Spanish Fork has been really diligent in coming to our family and asking them, because we were the first owners in this area. In 1963, there were a lot of people, but there was nothing in this area. And as we continued to go down this, when the general plan was being put together, that was in, I think, 2010, 2012, the city came to my family and said, what do you envision? What are you going to do with this property? What do you think? And they were very, they took a lot of input from my family, and we appreciated that. And as a result, the corridor along Del Monte Road was in the plan, and I fully understand what a plan is. It's advisory, it's not binding, it's just there. But it was intended, and it was put as mixed use. And so the city has followed that plan through the years. As you know, on the south side of us, there's storage units that have been approved. On the north side, there's a college, and then on the other side, there's another development. So one of the things that was open to us as being there was flexibility. And And that's what we'd asked for, and we believe that the general plan reflects that as a landowner, we would have some flexibility, and that's what the mixed-use designation was intended to do. So if you'll go to the next slide, please. So that just kind of shows that corridor. It's all along Del Monte Road, kind of everything that's highlighted in blue. You can go to the next one. But we recognize, we've actually become friends with the neighbors, the people that live to the west, those neighborhoods that have moved in. A lot of them are friends of my uncle, people we know, and we don't want to come in and destroy the neighborhood. That's not our goal. In fact, our goal is to really figure out a way to make this property fit in. And so we view this property as a transitional property, meaning, we're kind of in an awkward position as landowners. We've got storage units, we've got a college, we've got single-family homes, and we're trying to find the very best solution we can for this property where we can, fully realize this property. We can go ahead and sell the property for the money that we need, and then move forward. So we actually held 2 meetings. One was on September 21st, and the second one was on October 19th. And we were fortunate. We had I'd say 6 families in the first meeting, I think 7 or 8 families that showed up to those meetings and met with us. And during those meetings, the homeowners were extremely respectful. They were very sensitive to kind of what we were trying to accomplish, and they gave us very good feedback. And I just want to walk you quickly through the feedback we got from them. So the goal, the homeowners obviously were concerned, these 6 things, and I'm going to walk you through them really quick. The biggest item on the list was the connecting street between our property and the adjacent property to the west. There was a lot of discussion about the increased traffic that this development would cause as it relates to the west, the property to the west. And the biggest concern I heard from the neighbors, and I don't want to speak for them, but we spent a lot of time discussing whether or not that road had to be connected, whether those 2 neighborhoods could be connected. And they made it extremely clear to us that they don't want them connected, that they would prefer that our neighborhood act as independent from their neighborhood, obviously for the reasons why they don't want traffic to transition through those 2 things. So increased traffic, concerns about that traffic, and concerns about that connection, I would say was a good 70% of our conversation. Then we talked about, they were very concerned about the plan for the development immediately adjacent to the existing homes on the west. How, are we going to put a single-family home next to something? The people that have lived here, what's that going to look like? So I'll talk through that in a minute. And then there was a small remnant parcel in their neighborhood they were concerned about, and then parking. They wanted to make sure that any parking wouldn't overflow into their neighborhood. So if you go to the next slide, please. So first I want to talk about the connecting street, the increased traffic, and the remnant parcel. If you'll pull the next slide up. So this is the layout as we've proposed it. And I want to first focus, if you go to the next slide, we're going to zoom in on this portion. This is the connecting road that I'm talking about. And this is essentially, as you can see in the original development on the west, it intended for there's a stub road that comes right to our property, and Spanish Fork intended for that to connect up onto Del Monte Road. So on behalf of the homeowners, they asked us to take a position that these roads would not connect. That being said, I've had the opportunity to meet with your staff, and I understand that it's important to Spanish Fork that this does get connected. So as a landowner, as a developer, we're neutral on this topic. I don't want to chuck the staff under the bus, but I understand the importance of connecting this. I think as these neighborhoods join, there's going to be a lot of need for back and forth between these 2 neighborhoods. So we're not opposed to it, we're not for it, we're just neutral on the topic. But that being said, we got with the traffic department, we got with the staff, and we started to talk about ways we could limit the traffic flow to discourage regular traffic flow between the 2 neighborhoods. And there were a few ideas that we were encouraged to do. The first being that we put this connection road in, and then we have a median, that median would be intended to really slow down and make it almost difficult to pass through there, so that it wasn't a speed corridor. You'd have to honestly, consciously think about it. And then if you'd go back to the previous slide, the other thing we did is we focused on the roads and making sure that the roads had a series of bends and winds and 2 ways in, 2 ways out, so that the easiest way would be to exit on Del Monte. It would be almost inconvenient to come down, wind through the neighborhood, make your way down. And so with those 2 strategies, that was our way to try to address the needs of the neighbor, to make sure that we tried to really discourage traffic flow, minimize traffic flow, and try to address that concern. The other concern that they raised, this little remnant parcel, if you see, it's kind of in black. It's this little awkward sliver piece, if you can see that. That's kind of, yeah, thank you. That little piece right there was a remnant parcel left over by the previous developer, and the neighborhood was concerned about what we would do with that. And I guess it's been an eyesore. It's growing weeds all the time, and it just doesn't look great. So we've been able to reach out, and we've got a verbal agreement with that former developer to acquire that. And then what we did is on that piece right there, we're still working on it, so I have to be full disclosure. We haven't got it in writing yet, but we've met terms, so now we're just formalizing the agreement. But if we can formalize that and they make that happen, that lot then would face west. So that home that would be built on that lot would essentially be front-facing onto that road and become part of their neighborhood so that it feels more connected with their neighborhood, and we're not trying to do some awkward development in there. We're trying to make it really feel congruent. And then the other best part is that house would then be backing up to some transitional property right there. Would you go to the next slide, please? Parking was another big concern. So we feel like, and I won't speak for Dave or the staff, but we've gone overboard trying to add as much parking as we can. So our opinion is we've added more than adequate enough, but I'll let the staff advise on their opinion on that. But parking, they were just concerned that people in this neighborhood might wander down and park their cars in their neighborhood. So we went overboard. We had plenty of open space in this, and we added a significant amount of parking. Even since we've met with the staff, we've added even more parking. So we've just continued to add as much parking as we can, and we would work with staff on that. Next slide, please. The second biggest issue, maybe the first biggest issue between the connections related to these adjacent lots. And when we originally came forward with a proposal, we obviously had more density along this. And so as a concession to the homeowners and the people that already lived there, we did three major things. First, we had a number of single-family lots on here, 6,000 square foot lots. And they said, can you go bigger? So we ended up reducing the single-family lots, made them a lot bigger. And then the biggest request was, can you make them deep? So these are 120-foot lots, which is a very deep lot. And the intention of doing that is to create a good setback between the existing homes so that they don't feel like they're right on top of each other. And more importantly, so that these neighbors that live along this edge feel like they are living next to single-family homes, nice backyards, and it feels congruent with what they have and what they enjoy, so we're not impeding on the neighborhood. So I think our biggest concession that we tried to give to the next-door neighbors was this buffer zone, and this is what I refer to as the transitional. Rather than make the homeowners that live there today move in next to something, we've created this buffer, this transitional buffer of single-family homes, and these are going to be beautiful homes. These are Lennar. I don't know if you know about Lennar. They're the biggest builder in America. I've had a chance to do a lot of business with them. I'm from Las Vegas. Very proud of them. They do a beautiful product. They build a beautiful home, and these are going to be impressive homes that I think will complement the neighborhood well, and more importantly, create that transition. Because in our minds, we're going from single-family homes to storage units and a college. So we're trying to create this logical transition. Next slide, please. Density was another concern, and I'll just talk a little bit about that if you go to the next part. So the way I look at this, because the general plan, which I understand is non-binding, anticipated mixed use and transitional, we originally came to the city seeking an R3 or an R4 zoning. And clearly that was not going to fly with the neighbors, and they made that very clear to us at the beginning. So I think another major concession, which it feels to me like in a number of conversations I'd had with various people in the city, is to, and if you look, mixed use today, as your plan contemplates it, R3 is your lowest density zoning. That is what mixed use is intended to be. But our concession is to voluntarily reduce it down to a medium density, like an R19, and that's what this plan represents, is instead of, us really fighting and pushing for, which financially would be better for us, but instead of really financially pushing for this R3 or R3 zoning, we backed off. We told the neighborhood, no, we'll come back, we'll voluntarily go to a medium density, and then with this transitional plan, that's what we'll go to. Next slide, if you will, please. And so back to this, there was a couple other things that came up during the design committee, things that I'll just touch on quickly. There's some sidewalks that they'd like connected, which we're obviously going to do. There's a canal that's buried under here with a daylight that's off our property that we talked about. A few things came up as we went through those, and I just want to share that we're absolutely going to work with the city to deal with some of the concerns that they had, and I think those will be resolved. So with that, that's our position, our presentation. If you have any questions, I'd love to answer it, and then I can turn the time over to Jason, who hopefully will be nice to me tonight, but we'll see.
I will say I live pretty close to your property. There are some nights that I'll be standing out back in the dark and I can hear the cows. And I'm going to miss that.
Yeah.
I love it. Helps remind me of where I'm from.
I appreciate that, and I'm sorry for the motion. Coming here, I haven't been back to this grounds. I spent a lot of time right here, and I used to work at the auction, so there's a lot of emotions in me tonight. I don't know what's going on. So thank you for that. I guess it's Jason or Dave. Are there any more questions?
Yeah, I mean, I would maybe suggest that.
Question for you.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you're trying to comply with an R19, but did you mean specifically just for the single-family home portion? Or what did you mean?
So essentially what we're seeking is 9 units to the acre instead of like a higher. So R19, R18.
No, it's just slightly less dense than an R3.
Right.
Is
Okay.
what you're doing.
Well, so
It's not
what is it
R19.
we're seeking? I'm not exactly sure your terminology.
So originally, we had talked about R4 zoning. And the R3 zoning, I believe this plan is in the vicinity of 8 units to the acre.
Yes.
And really, the most appropriate zoning district to assign for that density is the R3 zone. So and I can understand why the R19 zone, 9 units to the acre you might understand that, but R3 zoning would be required to make this happen. At 8 units to the acre,
Sorry, yeah,
something
I
around there.
have my zoning confused. Thank you. Any other questions? So I guess our goal is tonight is to get as much feedback as we can because we're about to spend a lot of money moving forward on the next phase, and so that's,
It's Cody, right?
Yes.
Thank you, by the way.
Yeah.
That was a great presentation
Thank you.
and a really great information. I have a question. Is this a new home here?
It is, and that's the Lewis family, and we're fortunate. We've actually met with the Lewis family, and I don't want to speak before them, but a concession we gave the Lewis family, and thank you for bringing it up, is we're going to build a wall all along that perimeter right there, and the Lewis family is very comfortable with that. We met with them individually, and they want a wall there. So their message is as long as we build the wall to the height, which we're more than willing to do, they're comfortable with that. And I hope if they were here tonight, they would share that with you. Because
How high is that wall?
it would be what the city or the homeowner wants. I think it's 6 feet, but
Is it masonry? Is it vinyl?
yeah, it'd be a masonry wall, rhino rock wall.
Okay.
Yeah.
How tall are these townhomes in relation to this house?
They're two-story townhomes.
Okay.
The home is a two-story home as well, yeah.
And it's been a minute since I've been over there. Does it start to go downhill right about here?
It does. Yeah, there's some grade elevation.
So there's some natural separation happening here as well, right?
Yeah, and if you look, they've built a barn right there where your pointer right is. They've got a barn built right there. Their house is kind of set up on the road, and so their barn's back there. So most of those units you're seeing backs up to their barn. Their barn kind of hides all those, and then the rockery wall. And that's why they were a very important homeowner that we met with personally, just them alone, Mr. Lewis and his wife, and so we made sure they were comfortable with what we were doing.
Smart. And is this a house now? That looks like a foundation.
Yeah, it's under construction.
Have you talked to them?
It's under construction. We're not even sure the homeowners, and it's quite far removed from where we're at. I know it looks close.
Does that grade go down pretty fast right there?
There's a big hill, yeah.
That's what I was thinking. That's what it kind of looks like.
And we are going to build a rhino wall right.
The same wall will continue?
Correct.
Yeah, if you don't mind. Is it just this line or does it wrap around?
So, we originally said we're gonna build a wall all along here, along here, all the way to this point, and then come up along here.
So for the camera, he's waving. So the original plan was to build the wall all the way down and around and across.
So down and then all the way over to here?
But subsequently, we were told that this storage area is required to build a wall 10 feet off their property right here. So we didn't want to build a wall and then have another wall 10 feet away with just vacant space. So right now our plan is
Definitely to have a wall
here, and we'll coordinate with the storage facility group
Can you
on where that
connect
wall
to
will go.
theirs for sure, Matt? If it's a 10-foot wall coming here, are you able to connect?
We wouldn't have the right to,
Is it their property?
that would be their property.
Why aren't they building the wall on their property line?
I think my understanding, and this is just what the city explained to me, is
that
that
becomes a
the
staff
city
question.
asked for a buffer, like a landscape buffer from the storage units as a condition for the storage units approval. So The reason it's not on the property wall is because I think you did us a favor as the landowners next door. You gave us a buffer so there's a landscape buffer and then a wall 10 feet off our property line to make it so we're not right up against storage units, is the way I understood it. So it's just going to require a little bit of coordination with that landowner now and what the city wants us to do.
Yeah,
Did I get that right, Dave?
We definitely don't want a wall.
I don't want kids coming out of these houses and going on this landscape portion and down the hill. So that's
Yeah, there
something to figure
definitely
out,
need to be a connection there to make sure that's right.
even if it's,
We're willing to put a wall in.
right, well, you don't have the right to without, I get it.
Yeah, we have to put it on our property.
Right.
Yeah, you don't want an alleyway, obviously.
Right.
And then from this point this way, is there going to be a wall on the rear fence line there?
If we could have you speak into the microphone.
Yeah, so I can answer that question. So we actually discussed that with the homeowners. Because these are custom homes and that whole neighborhood's custom homes and there's not a lot of fencing, we felt it would be best because we're putting nice big homes next to nice big homes and those backyards adjacent, rather than throw up some what could feel like a big, we were just going to let the homeowners kind of figure it out. Because, by the way, I should mention, a lot of those people have already built some vinyl fences, there's kind of a mix of fencing along there already that those homeowners have built. So rather than try to get in the business of tearing down their fences and mixing that, we were just going to let the homeowners kind of deal with the adjacent properties together.
Okay.
We did commit to the homeowners that we would have in our CC&Rs. If they did put in a fence, it couldn't be any type of fence. We would have restrictions on type and color. So they couldn't put in a chain link fence or, something that the other homeowners. It's the latest thing.
And that's an important point too. This will have an HOA, which will give us the ability, because one of the concerns of the homeowners also is, upkeep, making it nice, keeping the architecture and everything well kept. So this will be an HOA community with CC&Rs that will help us enforce different rules and make sure that this neighborhood is maintained the way that the neighbors want it to be maintained.
And that would include the single-family dwellings?
Correct. We'd run it as one HOA.
Are the townhomes being sold?
Yes.
Okay, not operated, okay.
And I assume there's a contingency about the same question as earlier, as the percent that can be rented in this HOA?
Yeah, we defer to you. I'm not sure what Spanish Fork City's position is on that, but we haven't even had those conversations. But whatever your preference would be, we would.
We don't have the drafted CC&Rs. Have that restriction in there. But we'd be open to that discussion.
Sorry, I keep talking. Our intention wouldn't be to have them as rentals. And as we've talked before, these townhomes are built larger than your typical townhome, so they're going to be like 1,900 to 2,300 square foot finished, but an additional 400 feet when you finish the basements. So they're going to be true 4 and 5 bedroom townhomes that aren't really your rental market. It's more of a live and own and grow in townhome. So that we wouldn't have an issue with having, a 60 or 70% required occupancy, owner occupancy.
Good. Jason, you want to share your thoughts as a resident?
So before I go, full disclosure of all my neighbors that are watching, wondering why I'm the one that's here and not them. I probably wish they were here, not me, but Dave asked me to come. And I will be nice to Cody. He has been nice in working with us. But that being said, you know our position. Todd, Shauna, Kevin, and John, you were at our last meeting that was till midnight when we talked about our concerns before. And so when it comes right down to it, do we really want this development? No. Are we willing to put the same amount of fight and effort in that we did last time when we didn't get the result we wanted? That's where it becomes really hard to rally the group to do the same thing that they just did when they didn't get what they were hoping for. And you guys know, if you're following along, the city council made a motion, right, to change the zoning here. But as Cody is smart and moved quickly, exactly what we said was going to happen is happening. There was a precedent set that allowed the Del Monte to be changed to this zoning, which gave them the same right to do it. And people kept telling us, city councilmen, Dean Ingery said, he's like, look, we're zoning down. For these guys to do it, they're zoning way up. The city's not going to let them do that. But if that was the case, this whole area would not be zoned the way it was if that was not a potential to happen. And so I understand Cody's position, and he's taking advantage of the situation, as anyone would in their position. So we appreciate them working with them. There's still obviously concerns in our neighborhood with the traffic flow and all the stuff that he's talked about that we don't really like to see. I mean, even with him changing those homes the way they are, the one neighborhood in the cul-de-sac still has 3 homes in his backyard, even with him making them bigger. So there's still issues that arrive in this transition and how the traffic's going to flow. And you can say, you know, you can drop the pattern, but we all know that light, as Quail Hollow keeps continuing to grow at the bottom down there, you see all those new homes going in, they're going to exit up to that light that already has a problem. So that neighborhood in the morning or in the afternoon, they're going to not want to go that way because they won't be able to get out as easy as coming through our neighborhood. So that's why we were like, let's close it off if possible. And we know there's issues in doing that as well. And so there's concerns. Like I said, our neighbors would probably prefer it not be that way. I guess it's up to you guys on whether or not you want to fight trying them to put something else. Because when it comes down to it, it's a financial decision for them on trying to make the most money for their property, which everybody has a right to do, even if we don't like it. And so that's about it.
What did you want it to be?
Single-family.
I wasn't around back then. Help me out.
Single-family homes.
At what density?
I mean, when we were talking, we would be willing, his lot size that he has there, I think is, I don't know, 0.12 on those long ones. If it was 0.2 to 0.25, you know, a quarter acre in that neighborhood, we'd be happy with that. The problem you're hearing from a lot of people in this construction era that we're in is they can't make money doing that. Whether that's true or not, you still see people building single-family homes, but they're trying to make more money doing townhomes, and so that's why they're doing it.
So Jason, looking at the plans that are up there, if this were your property, would you do anything different?
If it was my property?
If it was your property.
That's a tough question. If you're trying to do it, that's why I said, if you're trying to make the most money for it, I can understand their situation. They're trying to argue between the school and the storage units. I still don't think it matches, because on the other side where Quell is, it's homes. The same reason we didn't like Del Monte, you're throwing in townhomes in an area that just doesn't make sense. The same here. The rest, if you look at the rest of your general plan throughout the city, it flows very smooth, all directions, except for right here. And I don't know why this area got messed up, but you don't see areas where you just plop in townhomes. So no, I mean, in my sense, financially, I can see why it makes sense. But for me, I like the single family. I would want it to flow that same way and look and have that same feel as everything else around it.
Trying to think, the zoning, the mixed use that's general planned and whatever. I know we've had this discussion. It's been that way for 9+ years, right? So how it got there, it's before our time. I don't know. I'm not sure why or what. What we do know is that's what it is, which is unfortunate for all of us that live around it. If we were envisioning something different, but I guess the difficult thing for me is that I guess we should have tried to change this a lot sooner than when the property owner actually came before the city with the development. Because at this point, they have every right to do so because it matches, you know, the general plan, the zoning of what they want to do. And so I understand that if it were up to me as well, I think I would love to see single family throughout. The difficult thing is it's not zoned for that. It wasn't general planned for that.
And I understand that the frustration you get with people in the neighborhood that want to be involved is through the whole process, they're being told by other city councilmen and even Dean Ingram people, they're like, even though it says that, the general plan is not law, and they're trying to zone way up where they zone down. And so that's where they kept using that argument, and then when they made the motion, and I'll be candid, to make themselves feel better about voting in the Del Monte, they motioned to change the zoning here. And so they tried to justify their motion to let Del Monte in by saying, hey, we're going to look at the zoning. But they already set the precedent and allowed Cody to come present his plan now, because he
So-
has every right to do that.
What Jason's referring to, I'm not familiar with that. What was decided for this property in that council meeting? What zone change is being
On the
referred
Del
to?
Monte?
No, I thought you were referring to this property had.
This
So
one
Del
hasn't
Monte
done-
had the zone change, but I thought you were referring to this one
No,
did too.
I'm saying, when Del Monte made the zone change, the city council motioned to have this reviewed to be changed.
Okay,
And I'm
okay.
saying they did that just to make themselves feel better, so that they could vote that one through and try to pacify all the neighbors that were here not wanting it.
I thought you were saying there had been a motion made on it, so.
So
Okay.
they asked for it to be reviewed.
So I show the current zoning is RR, is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
So as of right now, it could be changed to any type of residential zoning. What they're asking for, or what they will be asking for then, is an R3 to be able to fit this in.
That would need to be the request, yes.
Okay. And the general plan, what did we make it on the general plan?
It's currently mixed use.
So it's still mixed use?
Yeah, and practically speaking,
Which
I
that
think
falls
there are a number of potential designations that you could come up with reasonable justification to approve for this property.
So I was new on the commission back toward the beginning of this year, and the more I'm learning about city planning, the more this mixed use and this residential area makes sense to me. I originally thought, oh, this should all be one cohesive neighborhood with all the same kind of homes. And then the more that I'm looking at things like Harvest Park over in Mapleton and the community up in South Jordan, that humongous
The big one, Daybreak.
Daybreak, that there's a whole lot of advantages to having mixed use kind of communities where you have, and then you have transition zones. And to me, this does look like a transition zone with the college on one side and the busy roads and where they're going to build these
Shauna, the only
storage
difference
units.
is the South Jordan and Mapleton planned for that and built their roadways to efficiently move those people and have the transition. This was not planned that way. So you already have the ALA issues that we have, and Quail Hollow only has that one exit right next to the light. And so there's already traffic issues, and so throwing something in there just makes it worse. Even though I understand you're saying, yes, I agree with you there, but there's already problems, and that was our concern before that didn't get addressed.
Right, I can see what you mean. Because actually, to tell you the truth, my biggest concern is Quail Hollow and turning out of that
Right.
neighborhood right there.
And this will just add to it, because all those people will come out onto Del Monte, right to their light.
Has the
So-
city talked to the developer about improving toward?
A little bit, and there are a couple of things I'd like to touch on maybe before we wrap, just relative to really what the next step would be in terms of getting into some of those issues that, in fact, maybe if I might just touch on a couple of things right now.
Real quick, well, we've still got Jason. You were there for the arrive, obviously. What do you see happening as far as the residents if this is the plan that gets brought before us in Planning Commission?
I don't think a whole lot, honestly, the whole lot of the neighborhood they haven't seen the plans yet. There was 6 or 7 of us that's met with Cody a couple times that we had those meetings. So a good majority of them haven't seen them. Again, I'm sure they wouldn't be happy with it. But like I said, we thought it would possibly be better to try to work as best we can with Cody if that's our only option because of what happened last time. So we tried to work with that. So I said I appreciate Cody taking the time working with it, even if we don't want it, if that's the direction it's going to go.
And supposing that is the direction it's going to go, do you feel like enough has been done at this point to try and find somewhat of a middle ground?
Yeah, you're talking what Cody's been willing to do? Yeah.
Looking at it, looking at what Cody's done with the input of the community, of the neighbors, it looks like there's been a lot of concessions and taking in those ideas, incorporating into it, because it has taken money out of your pocket to make these changes. But I also agree with the neighborhood. It makes us a better fit for the area, making it more transitional. But I'm sure that hurt the overall performer of the property too. Yeah, that's got a good look to it. But I think you being involved early helped get more of a more palatable outcome if this is what goes through.
Right.
Yeah.
So, actually, I have a question for have you, thank you, Jason.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks,
you so
Jason.
much, and thank you for being so candid with us. So my question is sometime a long time ago, somebody was like, well, what if they did a retirement community? Had you thought about like a 50+ kind of community, and how would that have looked in that? I mean, this is way in left field.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So my background is development. I appreciated your comments earlier. I come from Henderson, Nevada, which, and Daybreak, and we're doing a development. So one of the things, the market will drive what's happening. And one of the things that's happening in Utah County right now is you have a lot of younger families with 1 or 2 kids that can't afford these big single-family homes. And these are $600,000-$700,000 homes next to it. And if you're 23, you're executive, you just graduated, and you need somewhere to live, a 2,300 square foot option that's in the 400,000 is huge. And so I think the market drives it, right? Active adult and things like that. There is a market. It's hard in Utah. Active adult's very hard in Utah because as a culture here, we don't like to restrict things. We like to be able to pass it to our kids and things like that. So active adult doesn't tend to do as well. There's a few in Daybreak that does okay, but it's something that developers aren't interested in. And so we went to the market. I talked to a lot of builders. Arrive Homes had this under contract at one point, just full disclosure. And so, we didn't just wake up today and do this. We've been looking at this for years. Back prior to Arrive even moving forward, we were in talks with this. This isn't like we just said, oh, we better do something. Our position, and I appreciate you saying this, is with all due respect to the homeowners, we were here first. We had this area. We got with it, the general plan. General plans are, while they're advisory, other cities, and I work in a lot of jurisdictions, the city really follows them because it was the notice to everybody. Everybody that moved into this area prior to them building and moving into these homes, they had the opportunity with a simple Google to say, oh, this is what's going in next to me, and then make a financial decision on whether or not they wanted to be next to that. And because of the history of this property, we were good neighbors. We said yes to the college. We said yes to the storage units, and we literally said yes to the homes. But my uncle said to the city each time, but we need flexibility. Just because we're the last ones, it's hard for us, the traffic issues, all those things. We didn't cause those problems. We were just there. We're just the last ones to go. We could have gone a long time and done this, and nobody would say anything. We're just kind of the last guys, the donut hole, if you will. But we've relied heavily on this corridor, if you will. It's hard to put a single-family home next to a busy college parking lot. It's really hard to put a single-family home next to storage units. Developers don't like it. People don't like it. So to your comments, we're trying to do the best we can to find a product, and I think Lennar's the best. I mean, if you know who Lennar Homes, you Google it, you're going to love the architecture, you're going to love what they're doing, and I think it's going to hit the market perfect as far as what the needs are in Spanish Fork. There's a buyer that is dying to live the American dream and buy a home, and they need that price point. These are not going to be little cheap, this is going to be a beautiful thing that people can buy and add to this neighborhood, and so that's kind of my soapbox, but anyways, yeah.
Dave, you were going to say something earlier.
Yeah, a handful of things if I can. Just follow up on both things that Cody and Jason have said. And I'll start with Jason and then move on to Cody. We really appreciate you taking the time to come tonight. And it wasn't just tonight, but like Cody said, there have been a couple of other meetings as well. Hopefully this goes without saying, but I'm afraid oftentimes it's not perceived this way. We as staff, we feel like we have a role to play that is somewhat neutral on certain issues. We also have a role to play to make recommendations based on our professional expertise and training and that type of a thing. But absolutely, we work for Spanish Fork City residents. And that means a lot to us, and we do not like making recommendations that neighborhoods don't like. I mean, that really is not anything that we enjoy. And that being said, still, we have a responsibility to exercise a professional role in a certain way, and we certainly try to do that as best as we can. Same thing for Cody. I appreciate him being willing to take the time to meet with the neighbors. Understanding how strongly people have felt about this kind of development in this area. I didn't really know what to expect at all as we had those conversations, and I think Cody represented the tone very, very well. I think people were direct and honest and open about their dislike for multifamily development in particular in the area. And yet we had productive conversations about how to make, things better from what was initially proposed, and that doesn't always happen. Getting people together and people having an open mind and in spite of their concerns, having that kind of constructive dialogue, and we really appreciate that. That being said, and I appreciate Jason, and maybe not saying this, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but as you've seen on other projects in other parts of the community, I think that there will be neighbors that will really, really have a hard time embracing, even this concept, with some of the things that have been done to try to lessen how it might impact the neighborhood. And I'm not sure what necessarily to do differently to try to address that than what we've already done, but I certainly acknowledge that that's the case, and we certainly respect their perspective and point of view. That all being said, I just want to reiterate, and I'm not trying to undermine anything, but I think the way that Jason characterized the conversations that the city council had with the neighbors and even amongst themselves, this zone change has to stand on its own merit, certainly, relative to everything that surrounds it. This is certainly progressing in the direction of being something that staff would support nonetheless, given the changes that have happened and given what we've viewed as being appropriate land uses for this corridor. But that is not to say at all that the Planning Commission or the City Council are obligated to either recommend the approval of this zoning or approve it, as the council would do. I appreciate Cody's representation. I agree with it, that I think cities certainly should have the tendency to make land use decisions that are consistent with their general plan. Certainly when the timing might be the way that it is for this particular property, but you're not obligated to do that. So that, again, I just want to be clear about that. And maybe moving on to some more germane to the proposal kinds of things, there are improvements that need to be made to Del Monte Road. Without a question, we've had some conversations with Cody about that. We haven't gotten far enough along in the process really to get into the nuts and bolts of that. If the property on the corner were to develop before development of this property starts, I think the most significant of those issues probably get addressed. We're certainly sensitive to the entrance or exits, the connecting road into Quell Hollow that is so close to Arrowhead Trail, and we've talked about different ways maybe to try to improve traffic circulation to account for that and to make it work long term. That undoubtedly would be discussed as part of a preliminary plat proposal with this, and I don't know where that ends up, but that's a significant issue that we need to work through, and even though it's significant, the solutions may be relatively simple. And there are a couple of other things that came up in the neighborhood conversations that we as staff talked about at length relative to the Del Monte Townhomes project, but didn't necessarily consider with this one. They are things that we would need to do a deeper dive on relative to traffic circulation. One gal in particular raised a concern about what the connection between the Tingy property and Old Mill Estates might do, just as another route to get kids ultimately to or from the ALA. I had not ever looked at it the way that she was looking at it, but there are some things like that that I think certainly would require some additional attention as we go through the next step. There's some other adjustments, and Cody touched on the majority of these relative to the actual design that naturally get talked about as you go from a concept plan to the next step and that sort of a thing. So Nothing's set in stone yet, and if the commission wanted to take time tonight to get fine grain on recommendations and suggestions that you have, we'd welcome that. If you wanted to share thoughts anytime, in upcoming days or weeks, we'd certainly, make that available to the applicant as well. And I'd say the same, for any of the neighbors, if they wanted to come in and meet with us as staff, we at least have this plan now to go off of, as something that now, is out there that that can be critiqued, and we'd be happy to meet with anybody anytime to do that. And again, I don't want to kid myself or anybody else. Again, I think it's going to be a challenge to get to the point to where everybody's comfortable, whether it's the applicant or the neighbors, with ultimately what happens with this property. But that's a goal, certainly to try to come up with something that's palatable for everybody and that, still makes some sense just from a land use perspective. And we certainly have some time to do that. So I guess that's my last comment.
What is our timeline? When would we see something before the planning commission that we'd actually be making a motion on?
Yeah, I'll speak for Mr. Winterton on that. The earliest realistically would be the first part of February, and that's probably aggressive. Okay. If they were to submit an actual preliminary plat application in the month of December, that's what we'd be looking at. Anything submitted after the end of the year, we'd probably be looking at March.
So if there's no more discussion or whatever as far as this plan, is this what you would probably submit? What we're seeing right now is what would be submitted.
More tweaks that the CRC, the design review committee asked us to make that are not reflected on here, we would make those changes. So there's a few things that the design review committee suggested for changes, but with those changes, we would then submit.
So if there's any recommendations that we have as far as what should be changed, now's the time to give it, right?
So just my comments, we're supposed to be making comments on this. Sure. I like inside this plat, I don't have any issues with that, but I do have concerns with Del Monte being improved throughout, and we have this section between MATC that I think it's theirs, between their building, that road isn't improved there, and to the intersection. That's a concern for me. That road needs to be improved to get, especially to Arrowhead, because that's a bottleneck when you add in the traffic coming out of Quail Hollow. If there's any way to, like we've talked about before, make those improvements and have that be contingent that the other developer pays for it when they develop that property, or something. If there's more coordination with them or what we need to do there, that would be a concern of mine. But as far as within this property line, I don't have any concerns with this. I like this. I think there's been some concessions made. I think they've worked as well as we've ever seen with a neighborhood. And overall, I like the flow of the project.
So I'll piggyback on what Todd said. I agree with what he's saying as far as inside the plat. I think the buffer and the depth of those single-family home lots is a great way to try and be fair to the single-family homes to the west, and it goes a really long way with me as far as not infringing on what they believe and have there as far as what they enjoy about their properties, which I think is really important, that you aren't inhibiting what they currently enjoy within reason. I also, my chief concern was this Wu resident. Is it the Wus? Lewis. That was my chief concern when I saw this plat, because I saw that you had buffer for everyone else except for them. And again, if they are actually happy with this and okay with this, that goes a long way for me. And then as far as the improvements to Del Monte Road, it's my understanding from Michael Clark, the city engineer, that it can accommodate and handle the traffic once improved. And I would be interested in hearing from him, once there is a clear plan and pathway forward to improving Del Monte Road with the storage units and this development, whether or not the connection to Wheatfield Lane is necessary. That would be something I'd want the city to educate me on. So I like the plat, and that's something I would want more feedback on from the city.
So let me ask property owner and potential developer, trying to find maybe a little more middle ground, and obviously it's your design or whatever, your design on what you've got here. How difficult would it be, and is it even feasible to just remove this section and put 2 lots and make these single families, just to try to increase or reduce, I guess, the density a little bit more?
Along that one home?
Yeah, yeah. What are your thoughts there?
The one that actually is impacting his home is actually this building over here. Because this building actually probably won't be too close to his house. It'll be to this new homeowner who will know it's going to be there when they move in, if that makes sense. And so with his shed or barn or whatever it is back here, he's actually got pretty good, he's already got a little bit of visibility covered. Just having this wall in here, and then he's also concerned about the grade difference between here and here. He's improved this landscaping he's got right here looks really great. And so he's worried about if we don't have a wall here, and this is a pretty significant change in grade down to this lot. And so we told him that we would make sure that this is graded to a point where it's not a big steep fall off. But we did go through quite a bit of discussion on how he could get comfortable with this, and it's too bad he couldn't be here today. But at the end, he thought what our concessions that we made would work. So that's where we ended up, and I think this is going to be the building that probably is going to be more in their visibility than the one next to it, actually.
Okay, so that being said, I guess not just for the Lewises, but for the entire neighborhood in general, how close would we get to moving out of the R3 and into an R19 if these and these then were changed to single-family lots instead of townhomes?
Just then be in R3, we're just slightly over R3 now, right? Technically?
Yeah, so
So you'd just be moving into an
We'd
R3.
still be R3.
Yeah.
it's going to be R3 down to 5 units to the acre, basically. We've got a really significant jump from, it's actually the R16 zone is the next most dense zone from the R3.
That's right.
And it's 5.5, I believe, units to the acre in essence, so.
My guess is you would lose about 5 homes in the total project if you replace those with single-family lots. You'd go from 12 to about 7.
Yeah, no, and this, I'm not saying this is what you need to do. I'm just, we're brainstorming, we're having some discussion, we're trying to
And during
see
the
what all the
DRC,
options are.
The DRC actually raised a similar question, but they were focused on there's units in various places throughout it, on corners and things like that, where they felt like, and Dave kind of pointed out to me. So I actually do think we are going to lose a little bit of density, to your point, but it's going to be more strategic with the DRC's help to make sure that those corners feel a little, better.
So maybe this one would go away, or this one would go away.
I think along Delmont, they'd kind of identified 2 or 3 that they were concerned about, and but to be as open as I can, I mean, this isn't going to be an inexpensive development for us. So losing units, we've already, to your point, and I appreciate your point, we've already cut way back because putting the roads in, it's going to be a little bit of expensive. So, we are, the units are important to us, but we definitely want it to feel right. So we're definitely open to suggestions and making sure that we tweak and do it. I don't know if major sections, as much as what the DRC pointed out, was the buildings would really make the community feel open and better. So,
which is why I'm wanting to discuss it now. I'd rather we talk about it now than before we've got a bunch of people in here from the community and we're actually making a proposal, because as of right now it's zoned RR, which means we can, and yeah, it's the mixed use, but that's not binding, meaning that what you're showing us right now necessarily doesn't even need to be even close to this based on what we could recommend. And so that's why I'm trying to decide or figure out what are all of our options to try and make not only you guys, make as much money as possible, which is what the developer's trying to do, but also try and make things comfortable and good for the neighbors and the surrounding community.
I definitely appreciate that, and thank you. We made a strategic decision, and time will prove out if it was a good decision or not. We decided, you ask yourself when you bring something in like this, are you better to come in and ask for more and then reduce? We decided to give up a lot of concessions early on. In other words, our original plan had another 30 units on top of this. Like, for example, in those single-family homes, we had 6,000 square foot lots. And so our strategic decision was just to be as straightforward with you as we could, instead of strategically coming and saying, well, we're asking for this, knowing that we were going to cut it back to 20. So I guess my plea with the group is we feel like we've already reduced this significantly from where we started, and we did that with the neighbors. Maybe we should have done it with you, but that's my only negotiating point, I guess, is just to let you know that we've been cutting, and we kind of feel like we're trying to get it as close as we can. But I definitely appreciate your comments. Okay. You don't have to go with it. I just want to give you the history.
No, and that's good to hear. That's why I'm asking.
Well,
Didn't we see in that traffic study when we were looking at arrives, didn't we see the layout that was originally proposed for this?
It was a lot denser.
It was much denser.
We saw an early one.
Mike, I'm kind of asking you on that. Weren't you, on that traffic study, wasn't there a layout for the Tingy property?
Yeah.
That was much denser?
It wasn't denser.
It wasn't?
It wasn't denser. It was single family.
Single-family homes.
Okay.
Shared driveway stuff.
It was like 96 acres. It wasn't like one driveway with 4 flights.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was, yeah.
Okay.
So,
But a shared driveway.
Dave, based on what Cody had mentioned, you see how many units along Del Monte do you see being reduced, or is this really what we're going to see?
Well, what you see is ultimately up to the applicant. They can present whatever they want. Cody mentioned some units that, just by way of how kind of they're configured and driveways and different things like that, and proximity on the corners of a couple of places, there are essentially 3 along Del Monte and one other one kind of on the south side of the project and one on the north side of the project, so a total of 5. That just with the width of the townhome units and buildings that they have, I see a hard time, really working very well. So that would go from 119 homes down to 114 just with those changes. And I might have missed some others. I actually haven't still listened to the whole DRC discussion, but Mike, Jared, Brandon, were there other discussions? I understood there was something about this up here.
There's a lot of concern with the north dead end.
What's the concern with that?
I don't know.
Here you go.
We can hear you fine.
You got a hot one right there.
Just one of the main concerns is the way it functions, and so generally you'd like a turnaround once you go past a single lot, whether that's for accessibility with the residents or fire and safety concerns. I think a lot of different individuals on the DRC had different opinions as far as which townhomes might be removed to make it look and feel and function a little bit better. Director Anderson gave his input. I believe there were some concerns raised about the irrigation ditch, and I believe the applicant was going to do some more research to just make sure that everything was being covered as far as any easements or uses or things that could be built over that facility. So the applicant's definitely doing his homework based off of the feedback that the DRC gave him.
And just to maybe be clear on, for example, the number of units that we think, and that's not even how necessarily I want to describe. Hey, thanks. Any concerns that we've raised about the layout and homes that should or shouldn't be included, from our perspective, it's not necessarily to get to a certain density. It's really just what makes sense for the design and what fits and how well does it fit and that sort of a thing. And whether it's 2 that end up, maybe being changed from what we're seeing here, 10. This is easier for me to say, of course, than the applicant maybe to deal with, but that's really customary. As we review a project like this, you looked at the condominium project earlier tonight where they lost a floor of 2 buildings. I believe that's 32 units, in all, that with the zoning district that you recommended be approved, they would have been entitled to, or at least to ask for. So, those types of changes are pretty customary. And again, in our view, it's just to come up with the best layout.
So one of my concerns is that I already brought this up tonight on another item, but there's a development up by me that has nice big quality homes like this, that it's a high density area, Somerset Village.
Yeah.
Anyway, so those are places that people stay, right? And and then they want to have an RV, and then they want to have a big vehicle and boats. And if you have these single family homes, there's people that they get teenagers and they have more cars. And so a big concern to me is where's their overflow parking gonna go?
Dave, I don't know if you want to address that, but we appreciate that. And that was raised by both the DOC. So we've gone and put I don't know how many units we have, but Dave, maybe you can speak to parking.
Yeah, my short answer is that we haven't spent a lot of time counting the parking stalls that they have here. At least I haven't. But I will say this, that in order for staff to recommend that this be approved, there's going to have to be significantly more parking provided than what the ordinance would require at a base level, and that's become our typical. For a project like this, 2.5 parking spaces per unit. And a lot of jurisdictions these days is excessive. They're requiring less than that. We've done a pretty extensive inventory in Spanish Fork. Ariana, that's sitting in the back's done that for us. And you mentioned Somerset, for example. I believe there are more than 4 parking spaces per home available in Somerset. In fact, I think it's close to, if not more than 5. And yet there are dozens of cars parked on neighboring streets every night. So, and that's consistent with other projects in the community as well. So for whatever reasons, Spanish Fork is a bit of an anomaly in terms of the amount of parking that's required, and it's hard to get, somebody that's used to working in other communities to embrace that. And it was hard for me as well, to believe it, but that's the reality. So, again, the standard would have to be exceeded by some significant amount. And yet, with this particular layout and what they're talking about, and I think Cody said this earlier, I think that's easy to do.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit to that. So all of these townhomes will be 2-car garage townhomes. They'll all have a full 2-car garage. As you can see, a lot of them on the outside and even some on the interior also have a full driveway. So you'd have another 2 spots, and that's in addition to the street parking plus all the parking stalls that would be available.
Okay.
Looks like there's a decent amount that don't have driveways. Is that correct?
There are some along that alley in the main entrance right there. Those don't have driveways. They do have parking adjacent, but they do have full 2-car garages.
So these ones, and all of these?
Those 4 buildings, yeah. That
Just these ones?
That building does in the very middle. Right to the right, anyway, right there.
That one does not have driveways?
It does have a driveway.
It does.
Because that's actually over the driveway's over the canal.
Oh, I see that now. Okay, so that one does. This one, and this one.
Those ones do not have a full drive.
And all of these.
All the other townhomes do have a full drive plus the 2-car garage.
Because I know the development to the north that went in with Arrive and Dean, he came back and made a change because of the concern of not having driveways.
Yeah.
And I can guarantee you right now that's going to come up.
Yeah, because Somerset Village does have 2-car garages and driveways, and they still have a huge problem.
So that's something.
Anyway.
That's something.
Yeah.
I don't know what the answer is, but I know that's going to come up with both neighbors. In
our meetings, we asked them to put all of them in driveways.
So
So let me ask you, what's the feasibility of including a driveway?
So I think the site has enough room for it. It's just going to remove some of the open space and some of that feel of.
Yeah, if I can speak as a developer, we actually experience this a lot. It's a balance between, because I've been in communities that have way too much, and then the kids are playing in the pavement versus grass. So it's finding that perfect balance, and there's formulas and there's ways. I think we have more than enough space to accommodate parking. But then the question is, do you want it all parking if it's not being used? So it's just trying to do the math and figure it out. Because these are two-car garages, you can calculate and get close, because we could add as many parking spots as you want. I don't think that's going to be the problem. I think it's just trying to find the nice balance and
Between
make sure
open space, between
you hit it
concrete.
right. Exactly.
Yeah, which, Dave, that's probably something that the city ought to discuss with the developers before it comes to us, is what do we want that to look like as far as driveways go? Because the residents are going to bring it up.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I understand it, the residents are concerned about driveways because they want to make sure there's adequate parking. We definitely want to make sure that there's adequate parking. In our view, whether that's with driveways or some other means, there cannot be a parking deficiency here. We can't have cars parking in Old Mill Estates. MATC doesn't want cars parked in their parking lot, and we don't want cars parked on Del Monte Road. I guess maybe backtrack a little bit on Del Monte Road.
Storage units.
They have to, yeah.
So Jason, let me ask you as a resident, let's say they left these the way they are with no driveway, but all of a sudden this open space turns into a parking lot. Would you rather see more green space and no driveways, or as a resident in the area, would you rather see driveways but less grass, less green space?
I obviously can't speak for everybody, but I'm assuming everybody, to what Dave was saying, would want more parking space and less green so they don't flow over. Shauna, where she's talking about in Somerset that do have driveways, you drive down, what's the main road there? There's still cars parked there. And so Cody's out of Vegas, but Spanish Fork, I think, is different than most areas of how many cars we have, and we have trucks that generally don't fit in their garages. And so we have to have enough space. So I would say all of the residents would mostly lean towards wanting the driveways versus more green, obviously because they don't live there, so it's not going to affect them running around in the neighborhood, but the cars coming into our neighborhood will affect us. So I think they'd much rather have the driveways.
Or more parking. So just something to consider as the discussions move forward is taking a good hard look at parking space.
Okay. So is the concern they'll park in the neighborhood? That's probably whether they'll park on
Del Monte, and just on their residential streets. I mean, it's just.
And the city has no issue with parking on Del Monte. We talked about that when we talked about the Arrive. That was allowed and somewhat welcomed to park out on Del Monte.
But if there's already a big traffic issue,
Right.
a bunch of parking on Del Monte is less than ideal.
I mean, if I buy one of these, it's a two-car garage, they'll have driveways. You're going to park in front. If I buy one of these, I'm going to park on Del Monte if I need to. If I buy one of these inside ones, if I buy this one, for example, I'm not going to be parking my car over here and walking.
Unless you can't find a parking lot.
Unless there's nowhere else to.
That's a good point, yeah.
There are a lot of spots we can see on our map here too.
We had the conversation with the residents, and when we showed them the last time, there was no parking here. That was all green space. And then there was no parking over here or over here. And so we've taken away a lot of green space to add that parking. And we could potentially keep doing that. It's just that at some point you start to lose some of the nice feel of driving in through this and seeing a nice green space with the front of these townhomes that really do look great. You take away from.
Yeah, no, I agree. I like the grass, I like the trees. Everybody does compared to concrete and asphalt. But at the same time, you don't want some stranger's car parked in front of your house every day, all day.
Totally agree.
So.
Or their trailer, or their you
Yeah,
know,
or
other things
whatever.
like that, yeah. The trailer, you might park it away and drive to your townhome.
Mr. Chairman, can I suggest something?
Yeah.
Along just the parking question line. Two things. First of all, and Sean has brought this up now a couple of times tonight, the idea that with the condominium project that we looked at earlier tonight, there might be a certain number of parking spaces that are designed for something bigger than even an extended cab pickup truck and that type of a thing. We haven't considered that in the past, but I know that there are going to be contractors and other people that are going to live in those condominiums, and they're going to have, you know, their construction trailers and different things like that. That's part of our community. I think that's likely going to be a part of the community for some time into the future, and I wonder if that's worth looking at in terms of requiring a certain number of parking spaces to meet some standard that we don't currently have, so that you don't. In fact, I would say that, you know, a lot of the overflow parking that you see adjacent to Somerset probably is not so much because there's not an available space on the interior of the project as it is a matter of the vehicles, you know, not being able to enter and exit, you know, all that well, or to, you know, to find a parking space just because they're not your traditional type of a car. I just throw that out as a thought. Also, like I mentioned, we've done a pretty detailed look at different projects in the community and, you know, where they fall in terms of available parking and that sort of a thing. That might be a great topic of discussion for a January work session. And that might shed some more particular light on what makes sense to require here. I think if you were to give Cody a number for him to hit by way of what parking should be provided, that probably makes it, you know, a lot easier for everybody. And I apologize for being as vague as I was and just saying, you know, some amount that's greater than the minimum. But I think this is something that probably goes beyond this particular project that we need to discuss with the Planning Commission.
I think that's right. Yeah, I think it's a good idea not only to look at the number, the count of stalls, but what are the sizes? How deep are they? And could you get a full-size pickup truck or whatever?
Those are great. Yep, I think so.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But I agree with Dave also, a lot of that's access. I think a lot of what you see on Canyon Road is a lot of big trucks parking out on Canyon Road because it's just hard to get in there.
Yeah.
And that probably also restrict them from going back down through the other subdivision. Yeah, Old Mill, but they'd still park along the road.
Just one quick thing. So now I'm going to bring a little bit of my base. You're right, we don't have all the big trucks, but one thing we're very good at, we have a lot of HOAs. And one of the ways we deal with parking, HOAs can become extremely effective in the CC&Rs requiring people to use their garages. One of the biggest problems you have, frankly, is people use their garages as storage units and they're not parking their cars, and that's, you know, but CC&Rs, and we do this effectively in a lot of our master plans, it's a violation of your documents if you're not parking 2 of your cars in the garage, and you need an exception if you have a truck that won't fit, things like that. So in addition to all the things we're going to look at, one of the things we can offer is some CC&R language that I'm very familiar with and use all the time that really helps kind of police. You can even restrict certain roads. If you didn't want parking on Del Monte, for example, we can make it a violation under the CC&Rs to park on it. You know, we can do things like that where you can really educate the homeowners how to park, which solves a lot of the problems, especially when you force people to park in their garage, which frankly is most developments like that, that's the problem, is people use them as storage units, not as garages. So but CC&Rs can prevent that. So that was just one little Vegas for you, but you know, I know.
Don't go anywhere, Cody. So on that line with CC&Rs, you as a developer get those set up and put in place or whatever, then you move on, you're gone, you're no longer part of that development. At that point, who is responsible?
Yeah, so you set them up with boards. You have a board, it's a governing document, it's recorded against the property, it's binding. It has Utah has statutory law that gives that HOA board of directors authority through the statutes to enforce the restrictions that have been filed. And so that board of directors, typically it'll be 3 or 4 or 5 members of the homeowners. You have a homeowners board association, you have a president and board members, they get elected every couple years, and they act just like you in enforcing the restrictions in their neighborhood.
So let me ask this, because I've been in an HOA.
Okay.
Where we've seen people not enforce, some groups don't, some don't. There's no penalties or whatever, it's all there, but there's no muscle behind it, nothing happens. So from your experience, what are ways that those CCNRs are enforced by an HOA? What are things they do?
Yeah, Utah law gives you the right to fine, so you actually can lien the property. So if you're violating, let's say you're parking in a place and you give them a ticket, you can actually start to fine the home. You can put a lien against the property. And so before they go to sell their home or whatever, they'll actually have a lien that would prevent them from selling their home until that gets cleaned up. So that's how we do it in most jurisdictions. I know it's done in Utah like that.
So if they're not selling their home or they don't plan on moving, those fines keep going up.
And then you have the threat of foreclosure. At some point, depending on how aggressive the HOA gets, is they can go ahead and, I mean, we've had HOAs that have moved forward with a $10,000 fine on foreclosure, and trust me, that forces the issue pretty quick where people will come forward and make the payments. It just depends on how aggressive the HOA. Unfortunately, in Las Vegas, we're very aggressive. I mean, it is, you guys are still pretty relaxed, which is cool, but I think like in Daybreak and some of those communities in Salt Lake, you're seeing that you have to use CCNRs to govern these things.
But then the HOA has to back it up.
Mm-hmm. And the president and the people do that. But I see it used every day. I sit on 6 boards right now in our master plan. So they can be very effective and work really well, especially when people move in and they sign the documents and they acknowledge it and they know up front, day one, this is the rules and this is what we're going to do. So.
Okay.
You could also hire a management company to do your HOA, and then it's a little less personal of neighbor against neighbor.
And that's a great point. My daughter's a sophomore at BYU, and this first week she moved in, her car was towed. So I know in Provo they're very effective at enforcing parking regulations because I've paid those parking fines. So.
With the townhome community, you will have an HOA management group that manages the maintenance of the townhomes and of the common areas that won't just be managed by the homeowner association board. You'll also have a management group that manages.
Can you require the management group to enforce the CCNR so the neighbor doesn't have to sue the neighbor?
The HOA should do that at all times. Lennar wouldn't be the one enforcing that, but the management group should be enforcing.
Enforce the CCNR so it's not the neighbor. Spanish Fork neighbors aren't going to sue each other.
Right.
And that's how it's done.
Right. It's the HOA management group that would enforce this in this case, and they would have it. There would actually be a separate a sub HOA managing the townhomes specifically, and that's where you would get the enforcement of this. It probably wouldn't be as enforced as aggressively on the single family detached, which will probably have a 3rd car garage and a full driveway. So hopefully you don't have that issue.
Who writes up the CCNRs?
We do.
So what's the likelihood that those would be available for residents to look at or read prior to this going through?
It's required, actually. You have to disclose those because they're taking the condition. Every home.
Not buyers of the home.
They'll show up on a title report.
Us and residents.
Yeah.
We probably won't have them finalized by that point. We can, typically these HOA documents are used, like the other developer said, they're pretty similar community to community if they're similar setups, which we have several communities just like this where we've built similar townhome types and have similar layouts. So we would have a prototype that we'd be able to share.
Okay, which would be good because I know with the other development they were asking for that.
So I know how HOAs work within their community. How will that interact with the neighboring community? If somebody parks in front of, or somebody's violating something in front of the Lewis's, they just decide to park there, would they then contact the management group and they could impose one of these fines against them?
You can't enforce laws on land you don't own.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, so if that's just no different than anybody could go park in front of Lewis's, not just
right.
us. You could have somebody,
So if they know it's this person in this townhome, they don't have any recourse.
Yeah, that becomes more of a civil issue.
Right.
More of a Spanish Fork issue.
Right.
For example, Jason's community could get together and get with Spanish Fork and restrict parking, and then, they could have their own enforcement of it, but you can't really enforce on public streets or.
That's what I was wondering.
Which, and I don't in any way, shape, or form want to diminish the value that an HOA can play in trying to improve the parking situation. In my experience, requirements that make it so that vehicles are parked in garages and that type of thing, that's probably the most effective thing that an HOA can do. There are some pitfalls, though, that come into play, and I think Commissioner Mitchell was kind of maybe touching on this. I've been in situations where HOAs are really, really aggressive about managing on-site parking and some different things like that. And, the best of intentions, that then gives somebody some reason to not park inside the development, hence that's, it may be unintended consequence of that type of a thing. And likewise, the idea that a management company might be in charge of administering regulations and that type of a thing. Yeah, ultimately, the management company answers to the homeowners and the HOA board. So, that's the government for the HOA, and, that's judicial, executive, legislative, everything that board is. And I think it's really important that the parking situation be dealt with, just in terms of making sure there's an adequate supply, and from there, it needs to operate accordingly.
I do like the idea of having certain stalls designated for oversized vehicles and having those in large stalls rather than having 1,000 parking stalls. Let's have the right size to make sure that those big trucks.
Yeah, I think that's worth exploring. And if you guys had any ideas on that, I think it'd be a great time to share.
I think it's a great idea.
Jason, did you have some comments?
No, it was Todd's. That was coming with that one. If they enforce it there, they'll just come into ours and there's no penalty.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think if you establish a culture and honestly relationships, then you can resolve a lot of things like that too.
Any more discussion? All right, thanks you guys for coming. Thanks Jason for your input. Appreciate it. All right, back to the agenda. Looks like we've got the Title 15 amendment, which is a public hearing.
Yes, guys. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to owe you one for even suggesting this again. We got a little bit rushed in the work session before your meeting. There's one other just discussion item.
That's fine.
That we'd like to have tonight. There is a piece of property not too far from the city office, a little bit to the north and to the east of us. Mike, I just sent you an email with some pictures maybe 15 minutes ago. Mr. and Mrs. Olson are here tonight just to get some feedback. And I'd put it this way on this particular property, to see if you have any concerns with them moving forward with the next step to put a duplex on it. You saw when we took the trip around town before one of your last meetings, it might have been October, I can't remember, they all blur together for me. We looked at this project over on 2nd West, and in essence they want to build, the same building or something very similar to it on a different piece of property. You might remember that there are actually 3 homes. You might remember that there are actually 3 homes here. There would only be the one building on this other site. So just a 2-unit duplex. And that's my little ad-libbed intro. I don't know if you guys want to add anything. Yeah.
Okay, where are we?
Help me with the address again.
It's 338 East. Is it 100 South? 100 North.
Oh,
Oh, 338 East. I was thinking a different one.
East.
toward the clinic? Oh, east.
It's east, yeah.
The original project was on 99 North, right by the clinic, like 99 North, 100 or 200. The one that you saw the pictures of, 200 left, sorry, that you saw the pictures.
Do you just remember that one? We drove by and parked
Yeah.
across the street.
Mm-hmm.
Frankly, people were very complimentary of it. Good fit for the neighborhood there.
He's a wanderer.
I'll plan
He's
it
a
myself.
wanderer.
And frankly, I don't think there's necessarily a lot to discuss. The idea simply would be that there'd be a duplex built on the lot that doesn't necessarily look like a duplex, which is one of the strengths, I think, of the design that they have for that front building over on 200 West, where you've got one garage in the front, the other one's, off to the side. And,
So it's going to look similar to this.
But it looks way cuter from the front because it looks like the front of a house.
Way
Yeah.
cuter.
I mean,
I like it.
you know what I mean.
I
There,
like
yeah, it looks like a home there. So across the street, there's a duplex. Yeah, and so this is a big family garden.
Correct. Yep, you know where I'm talking.
this particular, that home design works really well, I think, also for the property on the other side of the street because of a power line that's on the east side of the property, runs north-south along the east side, that requires the home to be set about 20 feet to the west of that. So that's where, if the driveway were on that side and the home were tucked a little bit closer to the west side. Again, I don't want to make it more complicated than it needs to be, but if you had any concerns about this, we'd love to share those with the applicant. They're anxious to move forward. I think they had anticipated moving forward tonight or maybe even earlier.
Permitted?
With a zone change. The zoning would have to be changed to R3 with the infill overlay. And that's it. It's been fairly routine.
R3? You said? Zone change to
R3, yep.
With the infill overlay?
Correct, yep.
What's the size of the lot?
It's a fairly good-sized lot.
I sent you a plat map as well.
We do have that also, yeah.
If you, I don't know what the measurement
I believe it's 77 by 110.
I can look that up real quick too, but
It's fine, it's fine. It looks
It's-
like it.
We'll get it. Give me a
It's-
second. Driving 4 ships here. 0.19.
0.19, zooming out a little bit more.
8,500 square
Yeah.
feet.
Zooming out a little more, Mike, are there any other, besides the one across the street, what's the rest of the block look like?
You've got a duplex to the east on the next corner block. You've got a duplex to the west on the corner block. You've got one to the north, and so they're kind of sprinkled throughout the area.
And did they get the same zoning designation? to be
No,
able
they
to
were
do those?
developed under earlier zoning regulations. And so currently, to do the duplex, you do have to do the infill overlay, and specifically the R3 with the infill overlay.
But duplexes are obviously not a new thing for this neighborhood.
Correct. But the idea being, as Director Anderson pointed out,
Looks like
making
it.
it
Yeah.
It's like
appear
12
and
addresses.
function
Well,
from the
duplex.
street as being a single-family dwelling.
I don't have any concerns with it. I love the fact that you've got one garage that faces the road, the other's on the side, so it looks like a single family from the front. I do appreciate that. I think that's a better look of a duplex than the two garages side by side.
Plan to live in one of them or rent both of them?
I'll stand up because you'll never get Kevin up here. No, we plan to rent them or sell them. I rent them, right?
These will be better.
Yeah. So, but we rent the other ones as well, and then we keep them ourselves, renting them and maintain them.
Cool.
I'd be surprised if I would end up being against it. I would just drive it, but from what I'm seeing, I would just be surprised if I was against it. I'm almost certainly for it. For what it's worth.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep.
It seems to
Any-
fit.
I don't know, we sent a plat map with those, but I don't know if there's anything else.
When would we see this? Next
Well, if-
meeting?
Or did,
Yeah, if we're good, we'll finish getting the plans drawn. We have the plans. This one doesn't have a basement because there weren't basements. A basement wouldn't work on the previous lot. So we'll put basements in it to make it actually even a little bit bigger of a duplex as well. We just didn't want to go ahead with those until we knew that that's where we were headed.
So a basement and a main level, not a second story?
Not a second story. I think that was the recommendation the DRC made is to.
How
What
wide
would
of-
the square footage be in each unit finished?
No. 1,300.
Right now, they're 1,300 on the main, and then the basement, depending on if we finish it or not.
2-car garage in each, or?
2-car garage in each.
How wide's the driveway? The left one.
On this one,
That one's 20 feet.
it's 20 feet,
This one was a whole lot narrower of a lot,
Yeah,
though.
the
I think
other
it was
one,
66
the new
feet
one's
wide
bigger.
total.
Okay. I was just looking at this truck in comparison
Our-
to this.
Yeah, that's,
Yeah.
Made me
that's
a
a
little
Utah
nervous.
limousine.
Especially if they want a trailer, based on our
Based on our last
based on our
conversation.
last conversation about parking out on the street because it's convenient.
Right.
Backing a trailer into that would be a.
My son lives in the far one, and so we drive down it and stuff. But the other driveway would be bigger as well.
Cool.
That one looks great. We drove it and saw it. It looks
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
In fact, isn't it 15 years old-ish or something?
No, it's a year, not
Oh,
even a year.
it looks new. I was
February.
gonna say, if it was old, it's withstanding the test of time, so, but.
It's an
Looks good.
improvement. Let's just say
Thank
that.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It was an improvement to what was there. We've owned the lot for a long time.
yeah, yeah, it looks great. Yeah, I wouldn't have any reservations with your proposal.
Yep.
Okay, sounds good.
You've waited a long time tonight. Thank you.
It actually came a little bit late.
Oh,
but-
good.
Thanks for an easy one.
you.
Dave, is there anyone else we want to have come up? Or?
Any other non-agenda items?
Yeah. Anything else you want to put on the agenda last minute?
Give me some time. We'll see what I can come up with.
Dave, real quick, can
We're out
we
of
take
people.
just a 3, 4, 5, 20-minute break?
You don't have to ask my.
5-minute break, if that's all right.
Meeting adjourned.
All right, welcome back. We're going to go ahead and continue the commission meeting for tonight. The final agenda item, at least I think it's the final, are the Title 15 amendments. Dave, you want to address those for us?
Yes. First of all, as I mentioned earlier tonight, we're requesting that this item be continued. I appreciated the conversation that we had with the commission last month. There are some changes I think everybody recognizes that need to be made to our master plan development part of Title 15. And that being said, frankly, I think the changes that we will propose to make, really aren't going to overhaul the program. I would probably describe it rather as, a tune-up. And we anticipate, with maybe some input on a particular issue tonight from you, coming back in January, after we've accounted for something that I really appreciate, a potential developer bringing up with us last week relative to what was proposed, and something that I hadn't thought through the way that I should have. But before I get into that for a few minutes, just as kind of a quick reminder for the commission and for anybody else that might be interested, really the changes that we're talking about have to do with making sure that the density that our master plan development ordinance allows is really more consistent with what you and the city council and even maybe a neighbor might expect in a particular zone than what our current ordinance allows. Meaning we're talking about reducing the density that a developer could enjoy with the master plan development option in maybe one of a couple of different ways. Probably the most significant one would simply require that any project has to have an average lot size that matches the minimum required lot size for whatever zone the project is in. And that being said, one of the other things Commissioner Ernst and I were talking just a minute ago about a suggestion that he has in terms of what do we do with projects that have kind of outlier lots in terms of lot size. And the project that we'll look at here is a good example of that. And I'd love to talk that through for just a minute. More specifically, the issue that was raised, it's almost like for me stepping back in time because I want to say probably about 2012, it was very common for Spanish Fork City to acquire space for public parks by allowing developers to do master plan developments. And in exchange for getting density in those developments, they would give parkland to the city.
Does that make sense? Some of you guys might be kind of familiar with how that's worked in different places around Spanish Fork over the years. There was a conscious decision made about that long ago, might even be closer to 10 years ago, to get away from that program, to no longer do kind of that quid pro quo density for parks arrangement. Largely it had to do with the fact that we weren't getting prime park space. We were getting remnants, we were getting different things, and even though the city had the ability to say no, we still seemed to get less than the appropriate type of space for parks. And instead of following that program decided that, hey, we're just going to require a slightly greater park impact fee. We're going to write out a check for the park space, but we're going to get the space that we want, where we want it, configured the way that we want it configured, and that type of a thing. And that's how we've been operating for the past several years. Now, that being said, we didn't necessarily preclude somebody from giving park space to the city as part of a development approval. The Sunrock property, we've talked about that in different ways in recent years. So we're talking about a site that Sunrock has owned and they've operated different businesses on for a long time. Arrowhead Trail, not far from the Tingy property that we were looking at earlier tonight. South side of Arrowhead Trail, not too far from Main Street. A little bit obscured by the Fritzy building where Habitat for Humanity is. Is that ringing bells for everybody? Do you guys have a general idea what we're talking about? There have been 2 projects previously approved for this site. One was approved pre-recession, I want to say 2007 or 8. The developer didn't follow through with that. Sunrock got the project reapproved here just a few years ago. But in any event, the zoning for the property currently is R112, at least predominantly R112. And the previously approved layout since has lost its vesting. That approval is no longer valid just because of the time that's lapsed. And Sunrock is now getting close to being ready to submit to get their approval reinstated. And they have a slightly different design that they want to propose because our parks master plan says that we need a park in this vicinity. We've had conversations with Sunrock from the beginning about designing a park into the development. And the last conversations that we had with them had to do with the city buying the park from Sunrock. We gave them specific parameters relative to the size and the type of configuration that we wanted to see, which they designed to, and the anticipation was that we would write them out a check for that space. That concept and approval has basically gone away. This is their next effort on getting a project approved. Right now, this project could be approved as a master plan development in the R112 zone, given how currently we calculate density, because they do not exceed 2.69 homes per acre. That's simply the number that we use right now with the current program, and that's all somebody has to do to be able to present something and at least have it considered and qualify for approval.
Is their application in, fee paid?
No. So they in essence could not be vested under this design because right now there's the pending right.
You hit why I asked.
Yeah.
You know why I asked.
Yep. And they don't want to push that anyway, fortunately. This design, however, does not meet the 12,000 square foot average lot size requirement.
You know where it's at?
Pardon me?
Do you know where is it at?
10.5, let's say, or 10.8 actually, I think.
Is it the one in here?
You can kind of see it there.
This is not in your packets. I just got this actually late this afternoon. So, it's on that order of being about 10% less than the 12,000 square foot minimum,
which is a number maybe that I'll come back to. But the lot sizes are smaller than 12,000, or the average lot size is smaller than 12,000 square feet, partly because of the park that's designed, which is actually along the west side of the project. It's the green, so stands out easily that way. It's 5 or maybe closer to 6 acres, Mike. I don't know if you can read that better.
5.94.
Up here it does say 2.63 units per acre.
Okay, so actually even under the density that they could get by a gnat's eyelash, I guess, but again, their average lot size is less than 12,000 square feet. Their engineer read the proposed changes that we were making and understood that problem, brought it to my attention, so we met earlier today. So the question that I have for the commission, maybe this will lead to some other questions, is would you like anything built into Title 15 now as part of these revisions that would provide an opportunity for a developer, if they were providing, and I need to be more clear, if they were giving space for a public park to the city that our Parks Department wanted to get some type of a workaround for having that average lot size. And just to reiterate why that becomes an issue, it's because of that 6-acre parcel that
they don't
impacts
meet
how their density is distributed throughout the project, that lot size average ends up where it is. Does that make sense?
So are you taking that park property out of your calculation, or it's being included in the calculation?
They've included it in the acreage calculation, which is how they get below the 2.69. But it's not included in their average lot size calculation, if you will.
Yeah, so if we were to include an average lot size
Of 6
Title
acres.
15,
If one of their lots were a 6-acre lot, then I'm sure they'd be above the 12,000 given where they've fallen.
I'm
Dave,
following
so-
the Blink book and just going to give you my off-the-cuff reaction to it.
Okay.
So I started having some thoughts. First thoughts are, I would want to make sure that it was the type of park we'd want. So if it needs to abut a public road, it needs to be a minimum of 5 acres. It needs to be whatever we need it to be desirable. And then my next thought was, I wouldn't want it to be an option for any MPD in a zone that is less dense than R112, maybe R19. Because then you would see if it's an R112 and you're applying it, a 5-6 acre park, you're then going to see maybe 8,000 square foot lots. The lot size will get smaller from what the underlying zone is, and I wouldn't want that to be an option in a R4, R3, R16, R18.
Meaning the park.
Yes, the park trade. I would make some parameters as far as what you're okay with. So if it's an R112, we're now seeing an average of 10,000 square foot lots. I'm okay with that. I think there's some beautiful single-family homes that'll go in that development, and it'll be awesome. But if you do it in an R16 and it gets tricky, I wouldn't even let it be an option. Even in an R18, I think that's probably not possible.
That's
I
good
agree
feedback.
100%.
Yeah.
I've got a thought I'll come back to after.
Dave, so the city's been purchasing parks for, you said 3 or 4 years now, before they're taking them as almost as trade, I guess.
Oftentimes that was it, yeah.
Comparison, what's been doing it 2 different ways, what's been the results? Has it been positive, or are you still not getting the land you want, or how has it worked out between the two?
We bought the space that's set aside for a park east of Maple Mountain High School. At least a fair share of that. There was another part that was donated a long time ago for that park. It's a triangular shaped park. I believe that was Arrive Homes that we bought that from. We obviously bought the All Abilities Park land.
The All Ability is kind of separate
Certainly
from
unique,
what this would
right?
be, yeah.
Really.
What about up in Legacy Farms? Is there anything up there?
Yeah, so that would have been among the last ones that was a negotiated quid pro quo. You give us park space in exchange for density. And that's worked out fairly well for us. The advantage that everybody had there is that it's a 220 acre project, you know, so.
Plenty of places. to
Yeah, I
build
mean,
park.
and frankly, we arm wrestled a bunch over the park design. Getting it designed so that parks look across the street, you know, from the front door into the park instead of having the park space ringed with lots that, you know, back on and just different things like that. But I think that's worked out generally pretty well. We haven't gotten some parks that are configured the way they were in the 90s and 80s, you know, that are probably not exactly what we'd want to see today. That's a good question. We really haven't acquired a lot of park space in neighborhood settings since
That was
then.
my concern. Has that dropped off? Has it from Parks and Rec, has that been a positive for them, or are they seeing less of it? I was just wondering what the impact
Yeah.
been when the policy was changed.
I'm not sure there has been a big impact on that, at least not yet.
Do we want more parks? Does it seem like we're in a shortage?
You know,
In certain
it's
areas,
funny
in this
because
area we would be.
Probably in January, you'll see a proposed Parks and Recreation master plan, a new version of it. The last time we updated that was, I think, 2007. So that's a good time to have that conversation. I know that there are particular areas of the city that we're park deficient in. For example, between US Highway 6 and Canyon Road. If you think about, and All Abilities Park helps with this, but going out, you know, maybe closer to Somerset or something like that, where you have two transportation facilities like that that really are a barrier for some park users, not having, you know, parks in that area. We've got a similar situation kind of along State Road 51 and a handful of places like that in the community where just you see localized deficiencies in park space. But I think in terms of overall acreage and those benchmarks that we try to hit, maybe like per resident, my guess is that we're probably doing pretty well.
So sorry.
Shauna, go ahead.
So I don't love that. I don't love the trade. I think that if it's going to have smaller lots and it's going to fit and call it what it is, like zone it smaller for if it's going to be smaller. Don't zone it one thing and let it be so much smaller.
This is why we're doing this to
Right.
begin with, and
Yeah.
so to continue to make exceptions just continues to add confusion and trying to understand why are the lots smaller than, you know. And in this particular development, I feel like we have gone above and beyond helping Sunrock get to where they are now and moved and whatever else. So I don't feel like we owe them anything personally. And so I guess my question would be, why not both? Why can't we get the park, but then also require the average lot size?
First of all, we are purchasing this ground from Sunrock, is that right?
Well, the concept that we're talking about here would be Sunrock gives the land to the city.
Okay.
And then essentially they get density credit for that land.
Okay, in this particular case then, they are donating the property for the park.
That
And
remains
then-
to be seen, but that's what they want to propose.
That's what they want to propose, but then they want higher density to offset the land that would have been part of the project, which is what we've done in many cases, I guess, or at least some cases. I guess everything's negotiable here. I think that there is a concern, and that seems to be what we were talking about with Title 15, and the changes there is, you know, how much do we reduce the lot sizes in order to get those concessions, whatever they may be? If we go too far, you know, then what's the point of a master plan development? Why don't they just go ahead and apply for the density that they want for that project?
Instead of R19, R112.
Well,
Which
there we go.
Sorry, instead of R112?
Yeah.
R19.
That's where Joseph's ideas
That-
went to kind of answered that. You
Yeah,
have,
and so,
you
yeah,
have for
and
certain
that's-
sizes.
Right.
But I personally see the benefit of, it's a negotiation. The benefit of them turning over that brings value to the city, the community as a whole.
Yeah, that neighborhood.
And if we have a parameters or a corral built around them of what they can and can't do, so we don't get into a situation like you're describing, John, then I think there's value to that.
So they don't donate that land as a park as part of their development. Does the city require them to,
Can't.
on a size of property that big, put in green space or put in a park?
We would have to change our ordinance to be able to do that.
Yeah,
So in
so
this
current
case-
law.
In this case, we're trying to get a win-win. We win by them donating park space where they don't necessarily have to do that. They win by getting smaller lots, building more homes.
Getting a certain number of homes.
Making more money.
Yeah.
What the city uses impact fees to purchase the land and keep lots the same size.
Yep.
So we talked about, I think, just about all of the options that are out there. We got a couple of others that I want to put on the table.
Can I just say one thing really quick?
Sure.
Just, I guess on the other side of the coin is there's the whole fieldstone concept where they have a lot of like very different sizes and a whole bunch of different things. And I can definitely see the merits of that in an area like this too.
I tend to agree with that, and thinking even a project of this size. This is right now all single-family detached homes. And even though average lot size is not 12,000 square feet, it's big. Like I said, it's I think 10,500 square feet plus. And for whatever it's worth, I appreciate the designer that works for Sunrock that put this together. He was aware of the Del Monte townhome discussions, and as were some other folks at Sunrock, and they're trying to steer completely clear of that. R112, relatively good-sized lots. Let's keep it simple. And there's a strong market as well, so that's easy for them, I think.
I'd add one more parameter as I'm thinking about it, and based on the discussion, is that you wouldn't even let it be an option unless the overall development met a minimum total acreage. So if it's 20 acres is the minimum that can even have the option of donating the 5-acre park, or is it 25 acres that even has the option of donating the 5-acre park, right? Okay. So these are the ways in which, these options don't totally make the underlying zoning dysfunctional. Right, it's a change, but it's not so massive as far as the density from the underlying zone. If you have a minimum total acreage for the option.
Got it.
If you've set that zoning though at an R12, R10, whatever, R110, why? What's your concern with that? How does that?
So hypothetically, it's a 10-acre. Let's say it's a 10-acre development, and I can give Dave 5-acre park, which gives me X amount of density increase. I may go from an R110 to an R16 as far as like
in terms of
actual.
Talking about lot size.
Yeah, as far as lot size, I may be able to take that 10,000 square foot lot size, donate a 5-acre park, and I still have a 10-acre development. So it's still number of units per acre over the full 10 acres, and now I'm at 5,000 square feet per lot.
Wasn't your previous comment that you would set a minimum at an R110 that they could go to, and you're concerned about it being down to an R18?
Yes.
I thought you had said that.
Which is another way to skin the cat.
Yes, I'm actually doing it both directions.
Okay.
Is what it's doing.
You're thinking multidimensionally.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm actually doing it in multi. Like
It's after 9 o'clock.
I'm
Let's
tying
cap
the chain. Like I'm like hindering the civil designer in multiple ways, as far as being able to increase the density.
That's a good point.
So in terms of just big priorities here, here's how I see it.
You see it that the designer could have also been a she.
I will struggle for a while to get gender.
Dave, just say civil designer. Don't assign a gender.
It's after
Communications. Yes, the designer. Incidentally, several of the best ones that I've worked with have been females. So, in this case, it's a Brooke who's a male, but priorities. I feel like you have said a priority is to require master plan developments to have bigger lots, right? And that's what we're working towards. So we understand that's a priority. Coming from a different direction, having park space in the right places in the community, configured the right way, the right size, that is a priority for our Parks Department and the rest of us. I don't mean to cut you off, sorry.
No, I don't mean to cut you off. Not necessarily bigger lots as a priority, but that the lot sizes are closer matching the zoning.
That's a better,
Exactly,
yeah, thank you.
exactly, yeah.
So we have those two things that both are very worthy things of attention, goals to work towards. Another one might be or might not be stretching the city's impact fees farther, which in this case, if they donate 6 acres to the city, instead of having us buy it, then that probably, it's sort of a rough number, let's say it's $100,000 an acre, and that's $600,000 that's not expended from our impact fee fund that goes towards some other park improvement elsewhere. So that's potentially the trade-off I think that we're talking about here. And again, honestly, I don't have a preference. I think it's just a matter of what between you and the city council, and I do think our parks guys will weigh in on this sooner than later when they really figure out what this might mean for them. One of their folks attended the meeting that we had today. So it's just trying to, I think, balance all of those different things. And one of the things that the gentleman that laid this out suggested, in fact, was because he's read what has been proposed and he immediately understood what the city's trying to accomplish here. And he said, hey, I get that you guys don't want smaller lots. And he can think through exactly what you described, how this could be abused and be taken advantage of with smaller projects. His suggestion was just that, maybe you only allow for a project to have an average lot size that's, let's say, 10% less than the minimum size that's required in a zone.
It still doesn't eliminate the externalities, the outliers.
And I think we have to deal with that separately. You're right. And that's the last thing I want to touch on. I think you're right about that. But that was just one.
That's a good point, though. What you said would work, even with the park as the park.
Well, and the thing that I like about that is it's truly scalable, right? In every way. So it wouldn't matter necessarily what the project size is and that sort of a thing. It's a safety net. And I guess maybe that being said, my first question for you is, and I appreciate what I think I heard Shauna and maybe Kevin say, there's not necessarily a need to try to accommodate, this particular concept at all. And another way potentially to accommodate this concept would be that instead of they have, let's say, 40 acres that's all zoned R112, maybe 10 of that 40 becomes R19, and that changes that equation for lot size and master plan developments. And I think it is a less genuine approach, so I don't necessarily care for it that much, but there are some other ways also maybe to get to the same end. Is this worth time working on, though, trying to come up with a way to make this work?
To me, I think it's worth the time if you're sure from the city's perspective that not spending the money from impact fee funds and getting this is a win for the city. Yeah. If it is, absolutely, I think it's worth our time to figure out meaningful parameters that don't completely defeat the underlying zoning. The 10% less than the average lot size requirement. That actually ties them up. It's a good idea. But again, it just if it makes sense financially for the city. Because
I agree.
We're giving up. We're choosing exactly which park we want, exactly where's the land, and we're paying it from our impact fee money. We're giving that up, so it has to be better, right? It has to be worth it.
And I don't think there needs to be a sacrifice necessarily in terms of dictating the design and, you know, whether or not, or exactly what space the city's taking. And I'll reiterate this, this is really easy to lose in the discussion, and developers have lost it. They have to be reminded that, hey, whether your project gets approved as a master plan development or not is not up to you. You applying for approval as a master plan development does not mean that at the end of the day, the city council is obligated to approve it. So it's just, I can't think of the last time, in fact, that a project didn't get approved as a master plan development. So that does get forgotten pretty easily. And, you know, things like, you know, street layout and park space design or any of those kinds of things are, you know, part of whether or not a project should be approved as a master plan development.
So what percentage of master plan development proposals include parks? I would imagine that it's not that high of a number or percentage.
You know, recently, you guys helped me out.
Most, no.
What do you remember?
Most do not, and
Yeah.
so
Most do not.
that's the other side of this
Certain amount
coin.
of green space, but not a park.
Usually
So-
they double the detention and the green space open requirement with the park. So
Right.
think of Canyon Breeze.
Oh, that's part of why we did away with it. You're right. That's
Yeah,
So they were
the required
using-
park
they were
space
using
was
the
detention
retention
basins.
as part of their.
Well,
Yeah.
there's a couple things too, right? Because detention, it's a functional item, but you have the hill, you have some, you know, it could have water in it. Is it really a functional park space? Second, does the city really want to take care of something like that? The second one is size. When you have there's some pocket parks that are basically a lot big. And it's like, does the city really want to go maintain that? Does it really have a regional significance? Not really. It's really only used by a couple houses around it. Versus a Legacy Farmers Park, they could program it. There's pavilions. It's really a city park versus maybe at best an HOA maintained park that I'm not going to drive across town to go to because I got 12 parks in between me and there. Where Legacy Farms, people come from a lot of different places to get there. That was the first thought.
Soccer games are played.
Yeah,
Or
and the second thought is once we get down into the west side of town, especially along any rivers, there's wetlands to take into consideration. They might own into the wetland. They're like, oh, sure, city, we'll give that to you as a park.
you bet.
In reality, that's almost more of a liability because how do you make that a park? You have to have a boardwalk.
Well, you won't
It's
take sensitive lands.
Right, so when I guess when we say we'll take park land, or however we take it, whether it's impact fees or donation, it's developable land. It's not floodplain or floodway, floodplain, a river, wetland, super
it's
alkali,
usable.
gross area that you're never gonna do anything with.
Yeah, something
that
that
can't
can be
count.
used.
The first criteria I heard Dave say, though, was in places that the city has identified that we need parks.
That's the
That
starting
was the
point.
first,
That's the starting point.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And a size
just can't
that's
be anything.
reasonable, that maybe the parks helps us understand what that is.
Yeah.
Right.
But these quarter acre, half acre, even acre small parks, you still have to have sprinklers, you still have to have lawnmowers, you still have to do all these things, whether it's an acre or 5.
Yeah.
The amount of regional significance
It's
just
that
but that doesn't
drastic.
qualify for what we've been talking
No,
about. That
it's
wasn't
that
what
side
Joseph
of
talked about or what Dave's
You wrap that
criteria
into
we've had.
the HOA, and the HOA maintains it.
Yeah.
If it's acreage,
So it appears to me that you're right to continue this. It looks like there's some more fleshing out of what we want to accomplish with this and how we modify it in Title 15.
my thoughts right now would be to purchase the land through impact and leave the average,
Oh, really? Okay.
yeah,
Got it.
throughout. But that being said, I'd love to hear from Park and Rec people, how that would affect them with budgeting. Is that gonna reduce being able to put nice parks or pickleball court, you know, whatever?
Yeah.
How does that affect their budget by now having to pay impact fees to buy a park rather than getting it donated? So I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about that, but.
I would expect that $600,000 would impact their budget quite a bit.
Well, and to put that into perspective, and these numbers are a little bit old, the Sierra Bonita Park, think about that one. I think that was $800,000. You know, and today that'd be more than $800,000, but you know, that's what could be developed with the kind of money potentially that we're talking about in a case like this. And frankly, there are a couple of other things that kind complicate the situation a little bit in terms of, for example, how our impact fee is calculated, which we do account for the purchase of park space in that. I think that's fairly easily addressed to where this doesn't necessarily make that more challenging, but anyway.
Doesn't this particular area, isn't that partially hillside too, that goes down towards that canal?
Yeah.
This is actually pretty flat up on top, I think.
Yeah.
It drops off more right below
right
this
here,
property.
isn't it?
Yeah, I think
That's
it's
the
real
canal.
close to the red
Canal's
line.
right here.
There's some property there that comes down fairly steep.
know it drops a
I
little
don't know
bit
whether this
over
is
here.
part of that.
Yeah, no, the
I'm sure you guys have
drop-off
gone
is
out and looked
just
at it.
downhill from this, which, in all honesty, I would love to see the park space kind of more central to the neighborhood than what we're looking at here.
Initially, that's what they gave us, wasn't it?
It was,
Yeah.
absolutely.
That's what I thought.
But the view that you would have
Yeah. from there
of
would
West
be-
Mountain from here, this would be a super cool park site.
Yeah, it really
would be incredible.
So my question is why are they giving that up?
Part of it is the historical, so, man, I can complicate anything, right? I was trying not to get into this.
I shouldn't have.
But this-
I knew I shouldn't ask it.
Because of what Sunrock's done on that property,
Yeah.
it becomes a little bit harder to build houses on.
There's stuff in the ground
Which
right here,
then
I'm sure.
brings other questions to the discussion about, well, how much density should they get for it then? If it's not entirely buildable,
could've
is this
built
akin
houses
to
on it
sensitive
anyway.
wetlands?
Yeah,
That's
good.
that's
How much should the
that's-
city
that's
pay
why.
for it if the city has to buy it?
That's a good point.
So you get where I'm,
Yeah.
on one hand, I want to just have a discussion in a vacuum about the concept.
Right.
Even though there are facts about this case that probably would have us look at it a little differently still.
It would be interesting, Dave, too, to know how often is the city buying and putting in parks, and also to look at undeveloped land and kind of try and pinpoint or see in the future how many more situations could this possibly, how often could it come up?
So here's a thought that I'm coming to, and it's questions that a few of you have asked tonight, and just kind of the whole discussion. I think we should have our parks guys be a part of the conversation with you.
For sure.
And maybe, mention the parking discussion, having that be part of a work session. I think this likewise would be a good conversation to have with them as part of a work session. In all honesty, I don't think there are any projects that are coming in so soon that this is, whether you act on this in January or February, it's going to upset any apple cart. I'd rather take a little bit more time and get it to where maybe it's not going to need to be changed again sometime soon.
Yeah.
But we could do that, I think, in January. And like I said, this was brought to my attention last week, and we met on it this afternoon. But those guys certainly haven't had a lot of time. That is our Parks Department people haven't had a lot of time to think about it either. So if you're comfortable with that, I'd suggest on that issue, we go about it that way.
Okay. When we talk about it again, are you going to bring up or show kind of the examples on the studies that have been done?
So we do the same thing for this and kind of add just this to that set of examples that we'd have to look at. And
Yeah, those neighborhoods that we approved, I'd be curious to see if this had been applied, how that would have changed those.
Yeah, and I kind of want to do that for the previous version that got approved here,
Okay.
too, just to kind of see how that compares.
I'd also be interested to see how other cities that have the developments that are like what's proposed from the Fieldstone, how they have that fleshed out, because it would be nice to have an exception for those kind of neighborhoods where there's a lot more contrast and variety to the neighborhood. But I don't know. Anyway. Just to see if there's specific ordinances that set something aside for especially that kind of development.
Okay. And what I'm hearing you say, you're talking about projects that don't just have single-family homes.
Right.
It's a mixture of housing types, not just lot size and that sort of a thing.
Right.
Our current ordinance, in my view, allows for that. And that also, let's talk about that more.
Because it
as
sounds
well.
like what we're doing is we're kind of pushing out that kind of development. But in my mind, it seems like that kind of development would be, that could be advantageous in the right place and such. in our
Oh, certainly,
community.
certainly. I mean, the property that the city is selling potentially, the gravel pit at the mouth of the canyon, that's going to be that. It's going to be single-family homes, it's going to be townhomes, it's going to be twin homes, in some different sized lots of single-family. It's going to be that.
Why do you feel like this would push that out?
Well, I don't know. I guess then you just zone it for higher density, and then it allows for that.
Yes, so for example, with that project, if what was on your agenda tonight were approved, and Quiet Valley, let's use that as the example, D.R. Horton's project, which is going to be probably 2/3 townhomes, 1/3 homes on individual lots. The minimum lot size in that zone, the R3 zone, is 6,000 square feet. So we would take the townhomes and twin homes, the multifamily types of development out of the equation, and we would simply look at the lot sizes for the homes that are on individual lots, and if that average were 6,000 square feet or greater, we would say it complies with the master plan development ordinance. So I think it's important, like you're saying, to not discourage somebody from doing that kind of a project at the right location. But in all honesty, the parts of the community that would be zoned R3 for somebody to do that, there just aren't that many left. That's a pretty rare opportunity that somebody would have.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
The other issue, the outlier issue, I've got a couple of other thoughts on that, but maybe if we could just talk offline too, get your thoughts there. And the idea is that, in fact, I met today with Sunrock on this. I met with Arrive Homes, who wants to develop property west of Old Mill Estates now. And their project, as they previously submitted it, of, let's say, 50 acres, well, they've got a home on a 4-acre lot. And they want that to be a part of the average lot size.
No way.
Hey, guys, guess what? We've been having these conversations with the planning commission, and
That won't fly.
You can keep a 4-acre lot, but you're not going to get density credit for that. So we'll march on that. And I apologize. I thought we'd probably be done earlier tonight. But one other thing, follow up to the conversations that you've had with Fieldstone. I want to zero in quickly on one thing, Mike. If you can go back to the presentation that we had for tonight, I think this is in the work session part on the front end. Fieldstone sent us 3 concept plans. So you might remember, I think it was back in October, I heard the commission say basically, we're not interested in the type of project that you guys want to do. We said 3rd-acre lots, and we're serious about it. That's what I heard collectively you say, and Shauna was a lot more direct than that in her comments, which I really appreciate. I think that was good for them to hear, important for them to hear. But yet the comment was made, but hey, you want to show some concepts, we'll look at them. So that's what they've done. And I suggested that we could talk about it tonight without Mr. Harris being here, and I appreciate him accommodating that. What we're looking at here, Fieldstone's 27 acres are the northernmost part of what we're seeing here. This is not part of Fieldstone's land, and this is the Quiet Valley property on the south. So Fieldstone's simply trying to illustrate, what might happen if this property were developed in concert with what they're working on here. All single-family detached homes. This is that particular density there, so just a little bit over 4 homes per acre. This, I think, would have to be zoned R19 to be that particular density. So right now, the The most dense zone that the general plan in the area would allow for would be the R115. So it'd be dropping from R115 down to R19. But a project, with some green space in different configurations, trail corridors and the like. The particular homes that they're showing here, these would be rear load, if you will, to where the garages are in back and they're accessed by an alleyway and they front onto park space and that sort of a thing. At least the majority of them would be. The focus here really trying to say, hey, density doesn't matter as much as home design relative to how lots there are oriented. So that's one concept. And I hate to make density the judge of whether or not a neighborhood is good or not, but they're with this one again at just over 4. Can you go to the next one, Mike? Here, a little less dense, also distinct in terms of no green space, much more traditional. Frankly, this is a block length that is too long. We would not consider that. There would have to be connecting streets intermediate to these streets to meet some of the standards that we have. Likewise, I think here still they're probably at like an R19 kind of density with that layout as well. And then the one that I think honestly has some merit, maybe less interesting than some of the others from a design perspective, but here he's basically, I think, raised the white flag. But not entirely, but basically saying, hey, this is R112 zoning. So this is not R115. This would, I would say, would require a general plan amendment still, but it's, in my view, I think you can start to justify this in a couple of ways. You are next to the railroad tracks, you are next to some power lines. We have this in the vicinity, which honestly I'm somewhat sensitive to, just the perception that people have about the city having zoned its property R3 and telling neighbors in close proximity that they're at R115, a very distinct zone. Even though with not only utility conflicts, but they're not in a hole, they're not, wrapping around power line. I mean, so to your point, I think there's perfectly good justification for why
Yes.
the R3 zoning exists on the Quiet Valley property. And frankly, we wouldn't be having this conversation but for utilities that will be delivered to the area only because this zoning exists on that property. I mean, truthfully, I think that's the reality. But
the gray one is somebody else owning that would be a better buffer zone, like a transition zone.
Yes, and to that end.
Didn't we see a proposal on that? Didn't somebody talk about what they were going to do there and it was transitioning?
Yes, way back, like March, I think it was. It was before COVID hit.
It's hard to know what to do on the north end without knowing what the middle piece is going to look like.
The middle piece, so we've told the folks that are working on the middle piece, this is just staff, so we might be out of line. We have said, hey, if you guys wanted to put a street of 9,000 square foot lots up against the street of 7,000 or 8,000 square foot lots that we're going to have in Quiet Valley, at least that's kind of what is being discussed, that's entirely appropriate. So we would recommend that a zone change for that with the rest of the property then being zoned to R115. So it'd probably be one row of lots at 9,000 square feet and then another row of lots or street that's double loaded on each side with 15,000 square foot lots as a part of this project, with the idea that transition happens here.
Yeah.
They're going from what they have to R115 right here, trying to make it quick and easy. Now, I think it's reasonable at least to consider, though, if they wanted to take this property and maybe put then some 12,000, let's say they wanted to put some 9,000 square foot lots over here and still have the majority be at 15,000 square foot lots, and at the end of the day be at 2.6 units to the acre instead of just 2. That's really what I want to throw out. So that's, at the end of the day, the other two proposals that they put on the table, based on what I've heard from you and some council members that I've talked to, I don't think are starters.
They're not.
So then it's just a matter of,
And I like that third option as far as the options without your last caveat.
so just as is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Myself.
Okay, and I
Myself,
don't.
Because
yeah.
It's slippery though, because if the whole plan is R115 for everything to the west and everything to the north and everything to the northwest, you do this.
Because he's already said he wants
Good
to
luck.
do more.
Totally valid. Totally valid.
And to the north of there are people that are developing R115 against the train tracks, and they don't even blink.
Arrive homes, they have them
and-
against the train
And
tracks.
people are buying them like
They're
crazy.
selling.
I know people that are building and have bought and are living there
Not a lot.
in R115.
Train tracks are just.
Shauna, to your point, Arrive Homes just north of there has them all, have bigger lots abutting the train tracks. They're all sold out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Watch
there-
out.
it's just an excuse to try and get more homes.
And just on the other side of the road here west, we just had those guys in last month.
Bombs.
Well,
So-
the bombs are
No.
right
The bombs
there
and
with the
the-
power
Yeah.
line, you know. so-
Yeah.
So Dave,
But with them, we were talking about a higher density along.
Along the track.
That's partly what
Yeah.
made me work
No,
up the
not
courage
a,
to-
well,
I would
more
not.
more because it's along the highway.
I would not be opposed, if you've got the R3 here, which you do, I would not be opposed to taking a piece, maybe up to this road right here, and doing an R9 here. But then nothing outside of that. The rest would need to be, in my opinion, the R15 to match
Okay.
what we've planned for it. But maybe the very bottom portion and all of this, yes, but not making the majority of it the R19.
But I don't think the earlier comment wasn't for all that gray to be R19. It was,
Yeah, not even that.
Just the
That's
bottom
true.
and then an
Right.
R115, which is probably my preference, but I'm not opposed to doing R19 through all of this as kind of a median and then going to the R115.
R115 with a
But
master plan
that's-
development's going to still have smaller lots, so.
You're gonna have some.
And really, for
They could
Fieldstone.
donate a park. I mean,
Yeah, there we go.
If these
huh?
guys, if these guys end up doing the R19 and then the R115,
Or
then,
R112.
or R112, whatever, definitely don't think you go down from what you've got right here.
Okay.
So that's why it's hard for me to say what they could do at the bottom portion of their property without knowing what they're gonna be butted up against.
I really think that all Fieldstone cares about is getting ultimately 69, is that what it is, or 89?
Yeah.
Sorry.
69.
69 homes on the project.
I'll let them do this if they donate this for a park.
so what Joseph brought up though, there are going to be some big outliers on that bottom left
Stole
corner.
your thunder.
You've got the power line covering, but that's all going to be counted as lot space.
No, because Rocky Mountain Power owns that.
They own that.
They own that property?
They own
They're-
it.
So that
this
is actually their property owner?
This is one of the areas where
Okay.
they own it, at least I
Okay.
believe that's the case.
I don't know, I just still vote to keep that as R115 and let that gray area be a transition. Yeah.
Okay.
Would you notice it as a transition? Like, the lots will be like 10 feet narrower? I don't know, I was just curious.
Where
At
it-
what point do you notice it being a transition?
Where you notice it is on the zoning map. That's literally, I think that's it. So I think Mike has a great point. Also, though, developers notice it on the zoning map.
for sure.
And that's where I agree with what Joseph is saying.
But here's what's going to
about
happen
the-
if you move it up
where
to
you draw the
here.
line.
If you move it up to here, and I'm the developer, and I'm looking at the zoning map, I'm going to say, guys, okay, it needs to all come over here now.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't it?
Yeah.
What's the difference?
You did next to a railroad, let's do
But
next
how
to
about-
the highway.
What's the point?
At the same time, Joseph, if
And a collector road, and-
if the northern 2/3 of this, let's say, is R115, then I do think that makes it easier for us to say
That's,
to other properties in the area, hey,
they're on.
no, it's stopped here. That's where that transition stopped.
Oh, yeah,
Can you-
definitely.
can you
I
just
agree.
stop where
But
the
like,
grade-
that's the east-west line.
And I get what you're, for me, it's easier to say no on the other side of the road.
Because
for a
of
few
power
reasons.
lines and there's the road and it's
And you're
just-
not
it's a
right
clean
up against the
break.
railroad tracks like this. I
Up
mean, I think
against here
there
is so
are-
much easier to have some sort of higher density for me. It's much easier. Up against Highway 6 here?
This
Or,
is
no, 89.
Railroad,
89.
that's railroad.
Up against
land.
89?
Right
Yeah,
there.
It's
railroad and
easier.
highway
It's an
on both.
easier sale, but we have to be consistent. That's just it. Whatever it is, it needs to be consistent.
I
If
don't
it's
think we have to be pressured into a developer.
Agreed.
what
I almost
a
think we
developer
make a
wants.
decision independent of the development and say, are we okay with R19 to 100 feet behind the train track?
I don't think
Maybe
they're-
we are.
I don't
Maybe
think
we're
they're
not.
gonna
Maybe
get
it's
their
R112.
69
Maybe
or
it's
whatever
R115.
that number was.
I'm hearing that from
Oh.
2 commissioners.
I'm-
So help
What
me
about-
articulate the message that I deliver.
What did Kevin just say? I missed it.
That they're not gonna get their 69 units.
Oh, I don't care.
Even if they do
Okay,
half
so that's
and
3.
half.
I don't care about that.
Or you don't care.
Is that what you're saying? I
Maybe
don't
back
care if they
to
don't
2.
get 69
Okay.
units. Am I supposed to? Because I don't. Am I a bad person? I might be a bad person. It's on the record. I might be a bad person. Just
I just vote that we just, I mean, my
Mm-hmm.
opinion is that we keep it the R115.
And if that middle piece is doing R115 on the top,
It makes it
it makes it super
cements
easy.
it then, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The sooner you go on R115, then it's that way the whole rest of the way is what.
Exactly.
you're saying, right?
Yep.
Right, you would never reduce it going north.
But if you do an R16 and then an R19, at what point does it actually transition?
So even though that,
I say we
with that
transition
middle
on this
piece, there
property.
will be a sliver that will need to rezone.
I think
Say
we'll
once you come out of the
probably,
hole.
Or general.
I think that's what
general
we'll
plan
probably
amendment, I
be
guess, is
presenting.
what
Yeah.
How big, is the DR Horton development going to be a nice development? Could you butt R115s up against it? Fine.
Well, not
Why
only
not?
yes, but absolutely. Yeah.
So why not?
So why not? There you have it.
If that's what the general plan is. We have, I mean, it's really easy to see why it's R3?
It's R3.
R3.
It's actually hard to see from the road, but if you go just a few hundred feet
trying to
further to the
see.
east.
You don't get much
Right.
And you
better
see
view.
what it
You
is.
can
That's
see
actually
why
a pretty
that's an
good
R3.
Right.
But past that, that's the general plan.
This area up in here is like, what, 10-foot hole,
No, it's 15, 20 feet.
15, 20
Yeah,
feet?
it's-
So
It's bad.
then you come out of it and you look
So what's
like
the big?
this.
Yeah.
R115.
We need it because I've got lots of neighbors that are moving to Salem.
Isn't that
They're
funny?
moving to Mapleton.
Exactly.
Because they want larger lots to do custom homes, and Spanish Fork doesn't offer it. We don't have
Gray
it.
area could easily, and it would sell like
My
that.
son's in Mapleton.
we lost him. We'll never see him again.
Never.
Soon he's going to speak another language.
My son just bought.
We did,
Just
Corey.
bought a lot in Mapleton.
Exactly,
Yeah.
I know.
To the
And I'm real
Mapletonians.
mad about it.
So, yeah.
Very slow.
Sounds to me like that's what we want to protect.
Okay.
We want to keep it.
You've given that
Although-
message before.
That's why there's 5 of us.
There you go.
So do I just say it's the majority? Or do you want me to say do I have a dissenting opinion I need to represent? to
I've
feel-
given my opinion.
Okay. You're comfortable up against the tracks?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Yeah.
Up against the tracks
It's your
being higher than
R112 to R115.
Mike's point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know it's.
You don't
not
see it
that-
driving through the neighborhood.
I know you don't see
You can
it,
still
but
build
for
an awful
some
nice
reason,
house on it.
It's a precedent
that's
for then the
what,
next guy.
it's the precedent,
Sure.
it's what it's zoned.
Yep.
So this blue
That's what
line
we
is
should
the
do.
whole line. So here's the property that would be we'll call it the buffer one. So its south border would be the top of the slope.
I mean, why not? In the plan to be R115, it's prime great land. People up north of that are buying the same kind of thing up against the track, up against highway.
Shauna, you've been consistent and really honestly direct. I appreciate that. I feel like I'm forcing you to say the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, and I'll say it
Message
again.
delivered. I got it.
I
I got it.
It's similar to what Cody said. Cody said it earlier.
I just think
without elevators.
Cody said it earlier tonight, when
installed-
Cody pointed out with his
We
property,
installed
the Kingy
kites
property,
so that you
this was
could
general
park on
plan.
Highway 89
My family's
and take
owned this for
kite up.
years. We knew, even though we've not done
Helicopter
anything with
pads on
it,
the
we've
top.
known for years what we've wanted to do with it.
Yeah.
Neighbors could have got on and looked and seen what the possibility was. It's the same for these landowners. They know what the general plan is. They should have had that expectation when they purchased the land or whatever, knowing that this is what the general plan has for it, so.
I doubt D.R. Horton's purchased this land.
Is this-
They probably just have
is this along
control
the
of this
railroad
land.
track there?
Fieldstone we're talking about.
Fieldstone.
Yes.
Fieldstone probably just has
10 to
control of the
16.
land.
They have a great contract
5 foot
that gives
lots.
them a lot of time to try to get
Right.
something worked out. They have not
So-
purchased it.
If they're not getting their 69, it is the landowner that's going to have a less of an offer on their property.
And
not the
incidentally,
developer.
with R115 zoning, I think it's just over 27 acres, so they would be at, like, let's say 55 or 56 lots if it's zoned R115. So it's from 69 down to 56, let's say 13 lots.
And you're selling, instead of
Then you do an
$400,000 home,
MPD.
you're selling
It's still a great deal for the developer. We're talking
$700,000.
about, they're still making money,
I'm
just maybe not as much.
That's with the master plan development, just that average that you'd get, so.
Yeah, and it's going back to,
But there still is a long-term landowner that will be impacted by that. It's just not Fieldstone or D.R. Horton or whoever.
impacted in the sense that his earning potential is going down.
Because Fieldstone will pay less.
Because
Yeah.
we're not making an exception to what has been in place for
Yeah, I'm
years
just-
and years and years.
Just point out, a lot of times we talk about the developer on that,
But it's
but
the
it's
landowner.
not like this developer has put hard money on this land yet.
But John's talked
People like
about
Joseph
this-
don't want him allow them to do that. They
John's
have a
talked
contract
about
where they
this as
control it.
well. John's had property in Palmyra that he wishes was valued a lot more than what it is.
Right.
It is what it is, and so,
So what you're saying is it's valued what it is today with the general plan where it is. Philstone's saying if you change it, I'll give you more. So it's something that's not a bird in the hand to, well, it is a bird in the hand of sorts because they're offering it, but it's today it's worth 150,000 an acre. They're willing to offer 200,000, we have to change the plan.
and you could do that throughout that entire portion of the city. It's determining where do we do that?
Right.
Do we make a change from what was already presented and somebody else put in place years ago? So, I don't know, it's tricky. I agree, I personally don't have a big issue up against the railroad tracks, but the concern would then be, are we setting a precedent? So,
Like I said, that's why we have 6 different opinions. I think that's great. It's a
You know,
good
I
debate
can
to
tell
have.
you that I wouldn't like to live next to the tracks, personally. However, I believe that there are only 6 trains that travel both tracks every day.
Yeah.
So,
I'm surprised there's
the
that
people
many.
that I've talked to that have lived next to the tracks, one way or another, I hear them at my house, by the way, and I don't even pay attention to them day or night anymore. And so, people are buying lots, like we've said, along those areas, but for me, you know, I think if I was buying a new home and I had my choice of lots and one was against the tracks and one wasn't, I would take the one that isn't against the tracks. And so I think that inherently those lots are worth a little bit less. And so I think that the last meeting that we had where we changed the zone, well, it's just RR now, but the bigger spot was 55 acres that we annexed?
Yeah.
And what was the zoning that we put on that?
Well, we're talking about, just for the time being, at least rural residential,
Rural
but
right.
it'd be R115 is what we've told the developer.
Did we tell him that for the entire lot, or is he under the impression that he could come back in a master plan development and get more lots along the railroad track? 'Cause-
He didn't take no for an answer,
Okay.
but we've told him R115 is what the general plan calls for. You guys offered some comments that suggest that you might be willing to change the general plan, like for area next to the tracks and that type of thing, but
Wait, didn't we annex and change it to R115 at the same time?
which one tonight?
You were
No,
the
last
one that
time.
opposed it.
Last time. Oh, you're talking about tonight, sorry.
Was it 12 or 15?
I don't know what we're talking about anymore.
Last
what
time,
happened on Swift Creek?
with the bond.
Swift Creek, it's the resolution, it's not the petition, and so
Yeah.
it will come.
But we talked about zoning a little bit. What did
And
the
I,
years-
and I thought because we had done the R115 on half of the road.
We did R115 on the rest. That's at least what we suggested. I'm sorry, Shauna. You're right. We did not talk about rural residential. We talked about it, but we zeroed in on R115 on everything.
That's what we did,
Yeah.
You're talking about on the other side of the street?
Yeah, and we still have another part of a process to go through with that, but that was where that was left.
Yeah.
Are you entertaining a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Make a motion that we adjourn.
I'll second that.
Were you done?
All in favor, aye.
Aye. You recommended the approval of
Did you have something else?
Swift Creek